I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. Today, we are talking Selection Sunday, all of the teams that got selected for the NCAA tournament, all of the matchups that we're excited about, all of the teams that got left out, and the seeding and what in the world the committee was doing. We're going to talk about all that. But first, it's time for the intro music.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Way downtown.
Bang! Bang! What is this going to be? Wow! Are you kidding me?
Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. But if you watch the tape, what you will see completely orchestrated this game. Bryce Simon is here with me. Bryce, the people can always tell when Dave is not here on the back end orchestrating everything because there's always a bit of a mistake, isn't there?
Yeah, it was all right. Like just a quick little 3-second countdown from 30 to 27 and into the intro music. What's up, Sam, man? I'm doing good tonight. I will say I'm back to the real world tomorrow. I've been on spring break all week. I've watched some movies. I've watched some college basketball. I watched a movie I did not enjoy. Thank you. 2.5 hours of my life gone for Anatomy of a Fall. Just saying, don't watch. And then I'm back to the real world tomorrow. But Sam, we have March Madness in our lives. And so all is good.
We will talk about Anatomy of a Fall at the end of this show. I will just say, I absolutely warned you about this.
You did.
Like, I absolutely warned you that this is probably not your kind of thing.
I text you and I said, I did not like this. And you said, I had a feeling.
Yeah, I definitely had a feeling. Okay, so Selection Sunday is hit. We're going to talk about the bracket. That's our goal today. We'll talk about the NBA draft a little bit. I didn't really watch any of the NBA stuff today. I'll catch up on the Wemby game particularly. Bryce might have thoughts about the Pistons and a catastrophe that happened at the end of their game later. But like certainly for the most part, we're talking NCAA tournament bracket stuff, matchups we're looking forward to, NBA draft stuff, everything like that. That's what we're doing today. So let's start here. Your overall impression of the bracket, your overall impression of what this thing looks like, because that's, I've been quite negative on social media about all of this for obvious reasons. I think the committee did like a catastrophically poor job across the board here. But when you see this, I think that you tend to have a bit of a different perspective on it than I do, just in terms of, I think you don't care as much about the seeding stuff as I do. So please give me your thoughts.
I don't care as much as you do. It's funny you say that because I almost text you and just said, Sam, because I saw you going crazy on Twitter. And so I almost text you and just said, Sam, I just want you to know, like, heads up, I don't care about most of this. If that's an issue for the pod, I understand if you replace me. Like, find somebody else to come on and do it because, like, I will completely understand. I have a hard time getting too worked up. Now, I will say, you say things and other people bring things up that I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, what were they thinking? The Duquesne thing was something that stood out to me. I'm like, what? 11? How is that even possible? Did conference tournament games even matter at all? I don't think they mattered either way. Yeah. Teams that won their conference tournament didn't get a boost. Teams that lost in the first round of their conference tournament, I don't think got hindered by it. The Big East thing makes sense. So I understand a lot of the questions and all of that. At the end of the day, I just don't care. I just want to see teams play basketball. And I feel like a lot of times it all shakes out. The teams I feel bad for, I don't care about the seeding almost at all. Like, I really don't. The teams I feel bad for is any team who legitimately got left out that shouldn't have. Those are the teams that I feel bad for, and the kids and the players I feel bad for.
Okay, so I think very differently about this in general.
Sure.
I do think the seeding stuff matters. Obviously, selection stuff matters far more than seeding stuff. The selection stuff that drove me crazy this year was to me, the Big East only getting 3 teams is completely crazy. So like, Bryce, you watch a lot of college basketball. I watch a lot of college basketball. We watch it through a slightly different lens maybe than what like the committee does, certainly. And resume matters. Having said that, like I used to cover college basketball a lot more substantially than what I do now. I know what the metrics are. I know what we're looking for here, everything like that. The Big East, according to all of the metrics this season, was the second best team in the entire country, or second best league in the entire country.
Yeah.
When you watched games with those like top 6, top 7, top 8 teams, you absolutely felt that way too, right, Bryce? Like,
no, like
I felt like when I watched those top 6 teams, I was like, this is very clearly a great league.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think Connecticut's awesome. Marquette, Creighton's really good. Providence, yes. Like, yes, I agree with you. Somebody's brought up that I wonder how much this proves, and maybe this is where Kim English was coming. Like Georgetown and DePaul bring that, they have to bring the overall metrics down a lot, right? Like, do you think that was a factor in terms of what those teams are combined 12 and 52? But then Xavier's a 500 team. I watched a lot of Xavier this season. Like that's a quality basketball team that like doesn't deserve to be in the tournament, but has some very good players and was a tough team to beat. You know, Nova's 8-50. Like you'll go through all of it, but yes, Big East only getting 3 teams was a little bit crazy to me.
Yeah, like I felt like Butler was the 9th best team in that league this year. Butler went 9-11 in that league and was quite good. Like Butler was a tough out most games. Like they were a difficult team to beat for the most part. Thad Matta like did a really good job with them. So when I look at the Big East and I see that only 3 of those teams get in the tournament, that's where I'm like, this is completely crazy. This is completely out of whack. This does not make sense to me with what I saw on the basketball court this season. And frankly, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense with the metrics to me. Like the reason that Charles McClelland told Matt Norlander on CBS that Michigan State got in is because of their best wins, basically their biggest wins. Well, Michigan State lost a couple of bad games, and their best wins are not as good as Providence's best wins. Providence has beaten Creighton. They have beaten Marquette. They beat Wisconsin this year.
Creighton twice, right? Did they beat Creighton twice? Is that right?
Yeah,
am I making that up?
I believe that they did beat Creighton twice. And on top of it, they have no bad losses. Like this team has absolutely no bad losses on their resume, point blank.
They also beat Wisconsin at the beginning of the year, Sam. Another tournament team. They beat Wisconsin.
For them to not even be in the last 4 out is wild to me. St. John's, I believe, is the 2nd highest team ranked in the net to ever not make the tournament behind Indiana State this year. And we'll talk about Indiana State as well at some point. For St. John's to not be in this tournament with how they played coming down the stretch, and I get it, it's a full season thing. All of the predictive metrics say that they should be in. Most of the strength of record metrics have them like right on par with all of the rest of the bubble teams, ahead of Virginia, teams like that. For this team to not even be in the like first 4 that missed the tournament is completely batshit crazy to me. Seton Hall went 13-7 in that league. That is a loaded league. They beat Connecticut this year. They beat Marquette this year, and they don't get in. I do not understand. Like, I just don't think the committee watched basketball this year is where I'm at. Like truly, like, or if they did, I don't think they know what they're looking at. And we need to replace how they go about selecting these teams. I already think that like we need to do like a pretty real overhaul of the net ranking in terms of what constitutes a quadrant 1, quadrant 2 win, everything like that. I think that system is totally broken. I think the net probably rewards beating the shit out of bad teams early in the season way too much. But beyond that, like, get some fucking people that know basketball on the committee. They were going to leave out this New Mexico team this year that just won the Mountain West tournament. They were an 11 seed. McClellan confirmed to Norlander that they were going to leave them out. If you watch New Mexico, you cannot come to a conclusion that they are a worse basketball team than like Virginia. I'm sorry. That team is more talented than Virginia. That team plays better basketball than Virginia. The metrics all say they're better than Virginia. Like it's completely crazy that New Mexico was a loss to San Diego State in the Mountain West Conference tournament title game away from not making this tournament. And now they end up as an 11 seed where, oh, by the way, they are 2.5 point favorites over Clemson in their first round matchup. It does not make any sense to me. Nothing about this makes any sense to me whatsoever.
Do you think this has a lot? Do you think the conference reputation or what the committee felt about conferences played into these decisions? Because again, like going off what you've said, other people, like it seems like the Mountain West got a lot of disrespect. It looks like the Big East got a lot of disrespect. Do you think it's truly they looked at the Big East and didn't respect the conference? They looked at the Mountain West and didn't respect the conference? Or do you think that's just a little bit of like, it doesn't really come down to that? It's just kind of a coincidence.
The Big East, I don't think it's that, because they put in a bunch of ACC teams and there's just no argument for putting in more ACC teams than Big East teams this year, in my opinion. Again, I watched those leagues all year. All of the metrics say that the Big East is a better league. My eyes tell me the Big East is a better league. It does not make sense to me. In the Mountain West case, I think that they just did not buy the hype or buy the metrics at all. I think that they thought that that league was inflated in some way, and that beating teams, Boise State beating New Mexico, or I think that New Mexico might have swept them, but Colorado State beating San Diego State. Like, I think that they didn't think that those were quality wins in the same way that, Texas A&M beating Mississippi State was a quality win, given that Mississippi State got an 8 seed and that, Boise State, Colorado State are in the play-in round. So I think it's clear that they did not respect the Mountain West at all as a league. Look, I've had some questions on, I think that the two teams at the top of the WCC, St. Mary's and Gonzaga, I thought they probably were better teams than anybody in the Mountain West this year, just being completely honest and transparent about it. But I thought that those other 6 teams in the Mountain West were all tournament teams, unequivocally, undeniably, no matter what. And we almost ended up in a place where that ended up not being rewarded. The other team that really got rewarded here was Florida Atlantic. I mean, you look at Florida Atlantic's resume, they have not done much since that win against Arizona. They have beaten North Texas, SMU, North Texas, Memphis, North Texas again. Those are their only top 100 wins since December. Yes, they beat Butler, who didn't make the tournament, but they beat Virginia Tech, who didn't make the tournament. They beat Texas A&M, who did make the tournament. But
is that a reputation thing, or do you think they valued their conference more? Because another conference I feel like they valued was the A10. Putting Duquesne as an 11 seed.
Oh, I think that's pure laziness, Bryce. We'll talk about that in a second here. Okay. But to finish my point on Florida Atlantic lost to Bryant, Florida Gulf Coast this year, and Temple. Those are 3 atrocious losses. And it makes they must have really valued that double overtime Arizona win. That's the only thing that really lines up for me, is that they must have really valued that. And they gave them maybe the reputational bump of them having made the Final Four last year. If you look at their resume, it is not fantastic. It's just kind of not.
And here's what I think the committee would tell you. Well, we have to look at the whole season, and we have to value what they did at the beginning of the season. I agree with that. My problem with that, Sam, is did you do that with the end of the season games? I just watched Iowa State completely annihilate Houston. And I think Iowa State's really good. I think I have a little bias with Iowa State this year just because I'm kind of in love with how they do things. But I'm and then they end up as the worst 2 seed based on how these things broke down, or at least that's what it looks like. And I'm okay, well, if you want to value the whole season, that's fine. But we don't, just not at the beginning of the year. You have to value all these games over Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I had somebody tell me there was a team that lost in their first round of their conference tournament. And I thought they was really going to hurt their seeding. And I had a person tell me in general, the committee doesn't value conference tournament results very much. And I thought they were crazy, and they ended up being exactly right on some of that. So I don't know. It's interesting. I know you have some other things you want to get to as well.
Well, let's talk about the Duquesne thing, because to me, it's the laziest thing I've ever seen a committee do.
That one was, yeah.
Like, look, I grew up in Pittsburgh. You've Pittsburgh shit all behind me. Like, I love the city, and like I've gone to Duquesne games when I was young. Like, shout out the Palumbo Center. Like, shout out Keith Dambrot. Shout out all those guys that did a really, really great job getting Duquesne into the NCAA tournament this year. They deserve an immense amount of credit. There's genuinely no case for this team to be an 11 seed. And to me, I think that it is so incredibly, honestly, just like offensive to put them on that line. Up until they beat Dayton, I believe they did not have a win against an NCAA tournament team this year. If you look at James Madison, you look at Grand Canyon, particularly those two, you cannot come up with a metric that says that Duquesne should be seated ahead of Grand Canyon and James Madison. You can't do it. It doesn't exist. It just doesn't at the end of the day.
Well, here's the
on
other
top
thing.
of that, hold on. There are 3 13 seeds this year: Charleston, Vermont, and Samford, that have a better strength of record metric than what Duquesne does right now. To put Duquesne on the 11 line is like laughable.
Because they didn't even beat the good teams in that conference. Like they beat Dayton. They had the one upset, and then to their credit, they went on and won the tournament, right? They earned the right to be in the field. As somebody who played in a one-bid league, I love this. I'm sure some people are wholly against it, like wholeheartedly against it, and I understand that, but it gave me a chance to go play in the tournament, and so I always kind of love that aspect of it. In the regular season, they never beat the good team, the best teams in that conference. They lost to Dayton in the regular season. They lost to Loyola Chicago. They lost to Richmond. And then because that conference tournament was a complete disaster, they didn't even beat Loyola Chicago or Richmond on the path to winning the conference tournament championship. When they came in as an 11, that was one that stood out to me as just like, what? Like, where did that clout come from?
Do you know what it is, Bryce? It's laziness. To me, it's laziness on the committee's part, because what that says to me, because there's no case for it, point blank, in terms of like seeding teams, it says to me that they went into Sunday with the Atlantic 10 getting that 11 seed no matter what. And I think they hoped that VCU would win, and VCU is like a little bit of a respectable choice as an 11 seed. Honestly, I still think VCU doesn't really have a case over James Madison, over Grand Canyon, particularly, to be an 11 seed. But I think that's probably what they were hoping for. To not have like multiple scenarios in brackets where you have Duquesne as like a 13 or a 14 seed is completely abysmal. It is completely embarrassing and laughable to do this. It doesn't affect the bracket like that much, but it's just such a indictment to me of everything that the committee was this year. The other one that stood out to me, and I really wonder about this one. Let's say Temple beat UAB today. Temple, like, very well could have ended up on the 12 line in this circumstance with like a losing record. They would have been 17-19. They would have beaten Florida Atlantic, and that's it this year in terms of tournament teams. Their second best win would have been SMU. Their third best win, I think, would have been UAB or Charlotte. But with what this Duquesne decision tells me is that the Temple team that was 17-19 and is currently being investigated by a U.S. betting integrity department about whether or not they are, shaving points or not, or if there's some sort of weird thing happening. That team might have ended up like as a 12 seed in the NCAA tournament based on Duquesne being on this 11 line. It's truly baffling, Bryce.
I mean, there's only 5 games today. Like, I understand that causes a little bit more work, but is it that hard to play out these scenarios? And if it is, like, this seems absolutely ridiculous to me, then go to these tournaments and like tell them like, hey, stop playing on Sunday. Like, give us finish these games Saturday night, because for the integrity of the tournament and what our bandwidth is to get it done, we need all of Sunday until 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, whatever time they'd want to do it. Then we need all of that time to put this together. You guys are, if you want to hold your conference championship on Sunday, we're not taking it into account, like whatever. Like, get them done on Saturday, give us all Saturday night into Sunday to figure it out. If they truly can't play out a few scenarios, because really, right, like, even the big ones probably didn't change a lot, right? The SEC and the Big Ten didn't change a lot.
Well,
I don't know.
The crazy one was the Big 12 one that you brought up with Iowa State. Iowa State went in and blew the doors off of Houston and destroyed Baylor, both of whom are top 9 seeds, right? I think the 2nd seed and the 9 seed per the committee's seeding list, right?
Yep.
They should have really been in conversation with North Carolina to be a number 1 seed if you look at what they've accomplished. They have, I think, 1 loss outside of quadrant 1. North Carolina, I think, has 3 or 4 losses outside of quadrant 1. They have the same number of wins. Maybe Iowa State has like 1 more win in quadrant 1. And we're in a place where Iowa State is the number 8 seed, as opposed to, at the very least, the number 5 seed. And ultimately, the reason that stuff matters to me is that it impacts the rest of the bracket,
Sure.
right? So because they didn't put into account the SEC, having Auburn win the championship, right? Auburn right now is a top 5 team, according to KenPom.
And has to play
Iowa State. Yeah, Iowa State is, I believe, something like 5th, right? So in that one region, in the East region, Connecticut's gift for being the number 1 team in the country this year is that they have to play the number 4 team in the Sweet 16 and the number 5 team in the Elite 8 potentially.
Yeah. That's ridiculous. No, I mean, you're right. Like, I know I said earlier that I don't care about that stuff as much, but I get it. I feel like they try to explain the seeding. Something with UConn got to choose their region, and then they built it out from there. And then on each seed line, they made decisions based on location. So I wonder if, like, it looks like Iowa State is the worst number 2, but it only played out that way because of location. Like, I don't know. We'd have to look, but I'm like, it's 2024. Do we really have to make decisions solely? Like, I realize we don't want somebody traveling across the country. Like, I get it. I understand it. There's part of me that hates that location factors this much into some of these decisions, though. Like, I wish it was as easy as just ranking them 1 through 68 and then putting them into a bracket and, so it's as equal as possible.
Well, and like, they do have some bracketing principles now, like the number 5 seed. So like the number 2 or the number 1, number 2 seed, right, can no longer be in the same region as the number 1 overall seed.
Sure. Yeah.
But the problem is that when you fuck up, listing the teams,
yes,
that you still end up with Iowa State in the same region as Connecticut.
So that's
right?
what happens, right? Whenever you don't have Iowa State in that scenario where it says we can't send them east because they should be the best number 2 seed, then you end up with them there. Yeah, that's why. So.
Right. And then, I think the reason they probably avoided Iowa State in the Midwest is because Houston is the 1 seed, right? So Houston is another Big 12 team. And I think they try to avoid that. But then you have Marquette as the other number 2. Marquette is in the same conference as Connecticut, but they want to send Arizona out west, for, regioning principles, right? So you basically lock Arizona into the West, and then you have Tennessee, who's kind of sitting there. Like, really what they should have done is just flip Tennessee and Iowa State, and then you end up with Tennessee in that East region, Iowa State in the Midwest region.
Yeah.
And I think it looks like a little bit more normal at that point.
Yep. No, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
If you don't have any others, I know you want to talk about Indiana State. who is the like the number one team that you would take out? Because like in fairness, I've always told people, like, if you
Sure.
want to complain about a team not being in, you got to tell me who's not out. Same thing with like all-star voting and all NBA, all of that.
Yeah. Virginia. Like
Okay.
Virginia is, if you watch Virginia, they don't really do anything for you. If you look at the metrics, Virginia is 69th right now in Ken Palm. If you look at who Virginia has beaten this season, they had an early season win against Florida, where I think Florida was a little bit shorthanded in that game, if I remember correctly. Then they have beaten NC State once and lost to NC State once. That's another tournament team because NC State went on their run in the ACC tournament. They have split with Wake Forest. And then their other win, I believe, is Texas A&M and Clemson. Those are the only teams they've beaten in the field this year. That's a 6 seed, an 8 seed, and what is Florida? A 7 seed, if I remember correctly. And then Wake Forest is not in the tournament, right? And then NC State is an 11 seed.
Yeah.
You run through, for instance, Providence, right? Providence has beaten Wisconsin, a 5 seed, Marquette, a 2 seed, Creighton, a 3 seed twice. And they have, wins over St. John's, Seton Hall, Butler. Like they've done a really, really, like they're just, that resume to me is better. Like it just frankly is at the end of the day. You can run through like all these teams and I think you can really look through it. And then like, for instance, Indiana State, right? Indiana State to me is just like the patented example. And Charles McClelland, like talking to Norlander, like kind of said like, yeah, we looked at the losses, but not really. We mostly just looked at who you beat at the end of the day is what it sounded like to me. And losses matter. Like losses are important, guys. Like who you lose to is a thing. It's why Florida Atlantic ends up on the 8 line. It's why Indiana State doesn't end up in the tournament. It's why Virginia like does end up in the tournament. Losses matter. Like who you beat and who you lose to is another piece of the equation. And I can't fathom it. I really can't understand any of this with how this thing looks. I'm excited for it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like I'm super pumped to watch these games, sit down and, be ready for these things. But you really have to spend some time talking about the committee here because we need to do like something of an overhaul on how we look at this thing. It's egregiously bad. Like this is, I've been covering this for 10 years. I started at CBS, I think in 2014, 15 was my first year. So this would be my 10th bracket, right? This is the worst one I've seen since I've been doing this. There's nothing about this that lines up to me.
One other thing that I want to get your perspective on, because you talk about how they didn't look at this or that, is the interview I saw, they made a reference to really valuing road wins because the NCAA tournament is played at neutral sites, not home games. That struck me as interesting. At first, it made sense. And then the more I've thought about it, I've gone, is that really at the core of what this is about, though? Like, are we trying to make the most competitive tournament, or are we trying to put in the teams that deserve to be there? Because if we're trying to put in the teams that deserve to be there, yes, road wins factor, right? Like they should matter more because it's hard to win on the road. But should we value those exponentially more just because these games are going to be played at neutral sites? Because it just struck me as interesting. I don't know if I've hashed out exactly how I feel about that comment. I'm curious what your thoughts are on if they truly did. I'm also would be curious if they actually did, like if you really looked at like Virginia's road wins versus Providence road wins.
Yeah. So I think that, okay, so that's two different things. So I think they're trying to put in the most deserving teams to me. That's my take on this whole thing. I think that they care way more about the most deserving teams being in the field. That's number one. Their decisions today, I think, showcase that, as well as the teams that they didn't put in the tournament. Like if you wanted like the best teams, right? Or the teams that would be favored to have success, you 100% put St. John's in. I think you absolutely put like Wake Forest in, frankly. Like they are very high in all of these predictive metrics. You probably put Indiana State in as well. Like there's just a lot of teams like that make me believe personally that it's clear that they went based off of resume. I also think it's clear that they did value road wins, because I was talking about this with the 3-man weave guys yesterday, 2 days ago, something like that. And the question I raised was, why is Dayton a lock to be in the tournament? Because if you look at Dayton's like overall, body of work, if you just go off of wins and losses, haven't really beaten anybody. Like they beat St. John's, they beat Cincinnati, they beat LSU. That's really it among the tournament teams. Like they beat Duquesne, I guess. Beat Duquesne twice. That's really it for the teams that made the NCAA tournament, outside of like Grambling as well, right? Longwood they beat as well. But they lost by 5 to Northwestern on the road. They beat LSU and St. John's on neutrals. They beat SMU on the road. They beat Cincinnati on the road in Cincinnati. Like if you look through their wins, it's a lot of road wins. Like that's what they're getting bumped up within the metrics, within the strength of record stuff. That's why Dayton is in the tournament, is because of the work they did away from Dayton. So I think, yes, it is clear to me that they valued road wins
in their non-conference though, because I'm pretty sure they went to Richmond and lost, went to Mason and lost, went to Loyola Chicago and lost. So they must have really valued those non-conference road wins, because they actually struggled a little bit on the road in the conference. So
I think that's a really good point too. I think that, they probably did not take that into account as much necessarily. And Daniel brings this up. This is a really good point. Wake had one of the worst road records of all time, like of, potential teams. I think that the road performance issue is absolutely a thing that they considered.
Okay, so let me ask you about Nebraska. Like, I think Nebraska probably got seeded right. I know that they were unbelievable at home. I couldn't rattle off their road wins and losses. Did their ranking strike you as overly positive or negative one way whenever you saw it?
I think it was probably right. So if you look at road, wins, right? Kansas State, Oregon State, Indiana, and then they beat Michigan and Indiana. So like not great road wins. I don't think road wins were all that mattered.
Yeah.
But they also beat Purdue, they beat Wisconsin, they beat Northwestern and Ohio State. Like they also just like had a body of work that was probably
and for the record,
like, to leave out.
I love Hoiberg in Nebraska. Like this wasn't a shot at them at all. Like I was just curious. Like that was a team off the top of my head I knew had some road struggles at one point, but was incredible at home. And so that's what, like, just trying to hash out the topic that we're on.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I give my crazy take?
Connor Andrews. Shout out Connor Andrews. Haven't been here live in a minute. I had to be here for this one. Mountain West was disrespected. We talked about that at the top, Connor. They absolutely disrespected the Mountain West. It's crazy that Boise State is like in the play-in right now. If you look at what Boise accomplished this year, Boise beat San Francisco, VCU on a neutral, beat St. Mary's, I think, on a neutral, sort of. Beat North Texas, a bunch of pretty solid wins. Then they beat Colorado State, Nevada, San Diego State, New Mexico, beat New Mexico again, beat San Diego State again. And then New Mexico caught them in the third, matchup in the Mountain West tournament, right? But they went 2-1 against New Mexico. Like it was a fantastic season from Boise State. They were 22-10, and they had an exceptionally difficult strength of schedule. They were top 60 in strength of schedule. They were 26th in non-conference strength of schedule this year, losing to Clemson, Washington State. I think they lost to Butler as well, if I remember correctly. They had some tough losses as well, and they really went out of their way to schedule hard. And the committee like puts them in Dayton. It's completely crazy to me. What is your all-time Galaxy Brain take here before we get to the games?
You know it's going to be that because I've texted you one that I will not say on the pod about something else. And so I actually have these thoughts, even though I'm like the least takey person ever. My Galaxy Brain hot take is they purposely left out good teams to support their push for an expanded field in the future.
Yeah. Honestly, like I'm not a conspiracy guy, but I'll hear that out.
So
like I'm
again,
at the point, like with like some of the shit that like Greg Sankey said this weekend, like if I'm not going to read those quotes, like go find those quotes. He like walked them back to Kyle Tucker in the Athletic afterward. Cause I think he realized like how big of a horse's ass he sounded like publicly, talking to Pete Thamel, like go read those. Look, I think it's clear we're getting some sort of like weird tourney expansion kind of talks here. I hope it's only to like 72. And I hope that, it's only to, get more play-in games among the, high major, at large potential teams. If that's the goal here and you give us 4 games on Tuesday and Wednesday instead of 2 games, I'm for it. I don't really care if that's the case. I also just think this whole conversation is, about tournament expansion is kind of silly when at the end of the day, what teams are going to go from, 45th to making the Final Four all that regularly.
Yeah, no, I'm with
it happens. Don't get me wrong. It happens, but
yeah.
Regularly it does not.
My last thing here is, and I've experienced this, the awkwardness of some of these teams, like it was Stetson today. Like they put him on camera and Stetson sees their name and you celebrate, but in the back of their mind, they're like, shoot, we have to play Connecticut. Like it was. So the reason I can say this is I experienced this twice. So our first time in school history, we're a 15 seed, but like we're on the screen against Tennessee. Like it's such an awkward thing because you already know you're not a bubble team. You're a 1-bid league. You have an automatic qualifier into the tournament. Really? I'm going to hoop and like, here's the other thing. Like Grambling State has to cheer going to the first 4. Like it's just, it's such kind of an awkward dynamic. And then they had somebody up there and Seth Davis is like calling out an upset while they still have him on the screen. One last thing. You're an automatic qualifying 16 seed. Would you rather go to the first 4 with the opportunity to say you got a NCAA tournament win, or would you rather just go straight into the 16-1 game?
So me personally, I would rather just go directly into the 16-1 game. I would guarantee you that all of the administrations prefer to be in the play-in game if you're a 16, because A, you get the notoriety that comes with playing on national TV, and B, if you win, you get a tournament unit for your league. So I can guarantee you that the admins prefer playing that way. Okay, Bryce, we've ranted about this for 35 minutes now. Do you want to finish on anything, or do we want to get to our ad read here?
No, all I was going to say was I didn't realize the impact of this stuff on like schools as a whole until we went, and the next year was the biggest freshman class in our school's history. And I just didn't realize kind of the notoriety that schools got from this stuff. So there is an impact to these universities and schools in general. That's all I was going to say. So
no question. But you know what? We complained for a little while, but the most important thing here is that the bracket is back. And I'm ready for this NCAA tournament week. The thrill of tournament time is coursing through my veins, and that is an electrifying moment when you wake up. You've got basketball on in the afternoon, in the morning if you're on the Pacific time. You gather around with friends, you clutch those brackets tight, and you brace yourselves for the exhilarating ride ahead. But hold on to your hats, folks, because this year the excitement levels are off the charts. Thanks to our incredible partner, Champs Pay Per Head. We're taking the madness to a whole new level with an opportunity that's as thrilling as a buzzer beater, a chance to score big with our bracket tournament. Listen up, entries completely free, courtesy of Champs Pay Per Head, when you use our exclusive code GAME THEORY. And here's the cherry on top. You can double your chances by creating your very own tournament. So you'll get a second bracket in this tournament as well. Let's talk about why Champs Paperhead is the best with bracket season. So with their innovative platform, you're the captain of your ship. You want to kick things off the Sweet 16? Go for it. You're craving some extra spice with incentives for picking underdogs. They've got you covered there as well. Champs Paperhead, you can channel your inner bookie and craft custom bets as well to keep the adrenaline pumping with your crew. It's like having your own sports book right at your fingertips. So where can you find this? Head over to champspools.com/game theory. That's CHAMPS sportspools.com/game theory, GAMETHEORY, and dive into the action this March. Be the hero with your squad and orchestrate the ultimate bracket showdown with Champs Paperhead. Trust me, it's a slam dunk that you're not going to want to miss. And remember, champions aren't made by sitting on the sidelines. Join the fray and create your winning bracket at champsportspools.com/game theory for a shot at our jaw-dropping $1,000 prize. Do not let this chance slip through your fingertips. All right, Bryce, let's talk about some actual games here.
Okay, let's do it.
We'll go region by region. We'll go, top left, top right, bottom right. Okay.
Let's do it.
In the East region, you've got Connecticut and Stetson. I'm excited to see Connecticut in the tournament, just generally.
Yeah.
If you made me pick one guy that I think could explode his draft stock, I think Steph Castle would be one of those guys. And I actually think Alex Caravan could be one of those guys if they go on a deep run as well. 6'8" shooter, really intelligent, makes great decisions all the time, sneaky better defender than what you think positionally. I wonder if those two guys could really, really help themselves this tournament.
Yeah, I think Castle will be really interesting. I see a lot of people still not scouts that I've talked to or whatever, but just people are really hesitant on Castle still because of the shot and all of that. And I think I text you this, you kind of were like, Bryce, why aren't people because I told you, there's some people that are really low on him. I said, I think people are still rounding into the archetype of player he is compared to what they thought he was going to be. And the shot was so broke to start the year, but now it's come around a little bit more. So I think showing that off in these tournaments games would be really impressive. Actually, the guy I thought you were going to say is Cam Spencer, because I feel like Cam Spencer is the type of player that could just take this tournament over with some big games, some big shots. He just has that moxie and that attitude that seems to really fit in well. And so I'm fascinated to see more games from these guys. I mean, there's a lot of guys I think we both feel like we have a really good vibe on. I'm not saying we're going to just skyrocket guys one way or the other on our boards. Even Clingan, I'm interested. One critique I've had of Donovan Clingan is how many minutes can this kid play? How many consecutive minutes can he play? How many total minutes can he play in a game? And so I'm interested to see as they get into these really competitive games, how many minutes will he play in those? So Connecticut's a team, maybe not the first game isn't something I'm overly crazy, interested in, with all due respect to Stetson, but in that second round, even what are we going to get there and start to evaluate these guys?
Yeah. So we'll get FAU and Northwestern in that second game, right? Somewhat interesting game, right?
Yeah.
Florida Atlantic has a couple of guys in Elijah Martin and Janelle Davis that are sneaky-ish potential NBA guys. I would say John L. Davis is more the guy that scouts look at as a real potential player at the next level. Them playing Northwestern is somewhat interesting. It's going to be a very, very close game, I think. Boo Buie is, one of the best clutch guards in the entire country. Ryan Langborg last year was on the Princeton team that made a deep run, killer shooter, floor spacer for them. I'm really interested to see, I guess, that guard matchup. And then additionally, whichever of these teams gets through to play Connecticut, they have size, both of them. Brooks Barnhizer, Matthew Nicholson actually sat out. Matthew Nicholson's a big deal. If he can get back for that game against, Connecticut, that'd be big. I don't totally know what's going on with him, but Brooks Barnhizer is a really, really high level defender for Northwestern. Florida Atlantic obviously has Vlad Golden, the big, enormous 7-footer who was at Texas Tech originally, was on their Final Four team last year. Those are the kind of guys that can match up potentially with Donovan Clingan. So you could actually get some really intriguing potential situations from either of these teams. I think like if Boo Buie gets hot, if John L. Davis gets hot, like things could at least be fun in that matchup.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And I think both of them have, back to your Stephon Castle, like whichever team gets through, like I would love to, I don't know if Castle would match up with Boo Buie, but I would love to see him try. Like I would love to see that matchup just because Bowie is
Would, to be honest
and
with you.
yeah, and Bowie, I've seen him do some really good stuff in isolation. I'd like to see if Castle could hold up. And then if not, like different type of guard, but John L. Davis, like match up with him. Okay, can you guard, see Castle defend him? So, and yeah, if Golden, if it's FAU and him against Klingon. So yeah, I think that second round, no matter what happens, that'll where it'll start to be interesting for Connecticut.
Next up would be San Diego State and UAB. That is a 5-12 matchup. San Diego State has a couple of interesting kids in Jaden Ledee, who's been one of the best college basketball players in the country this year. Lamont Butler hit the shot last year to send San Diego State to the championship game. Won Defensive Player of the Year this year in the Mountain West. I've always kind of sneaky liked Lamont Butler and think like he's probably going to have to fight his way up to the NBA the hard way, but has kind of a chance to like get a sniff at some point because of the defense. And if he can become a better shooter, Reese Waters, Darian Trammell, San Diego State is a really, really high level backcourt. UAB, on the other hand, has a couple of guys in Eric Gaines, who is a super athlete, originally started at LSU, came to UAB and is just extremely, extremely dynamic with the ball in his hands. And then Yaxel Landeborg is this really intriguing, just like big dude who can kind of step away from the basket a little bit, draws a ton of fouls, rebounds the hell out of the ball, blocks shots. I've seen some people think he could be an NBA guy. I'm not quite there when I've seen him play, but a very, very fun matchup that I think UAB could at least push San Diego State in.
Yeah, I mean, this one isn't like at the top of your NBA draft games, I guess. Ledee is, a guy that's interesting and definitely has put up a ton of production. I think it's also really interesting, Sam, in the first 5 minutes of this conversation, and we've talked about 6 teams. We've already talked about 3 of the 4 final 4 teams from last year. Like they have those
Definitely.
3 teams all right here jam-packed together, which, whether it's coincidence or they do it on purpose, that it seems like there's always some of that stuff. I know we'll get to the Caleb Love, North Carolina one later as well, that, just the potential of some of these storylines that could happen.
The next one will be Auburn and Yale. I was kind of looking forward, to be honest with you. I was hoping Princeton would make it so that we get to see Xavier Lee in the tournament. Yeah. I will say Danny Wolf is a guy that like has occasionally come up with scouts for me as like, okay, you should take a look at this big 7-foot kid from Yale. Anytime I've watched him, I've thought like unbelievable college basketball player, probably not an NBA guy. Like he's a 7-footer who can really step away and shoot a little bit, blocks a ton of shots. You get why teams would be intrigued for sure. I just don't know if he moves well enough. I think this is actually like just a really, really bad matchup for Yale, to be honest with you. Yale does not turn the ball over a ton, which I think is going to at least like kind of give them a shot against this like super aggressive on ball defense from Auburn. But having Janai Broome be able to like kind of take Danny Wolf out of this game, I think is going to be a problem for Yale. And I'll be honest with you too. Janai Broome is a guy that I think could really help himself throughout the NCAA tournament in regard to his pro prospects. I do not see him get named very often at all in regard to, guys that could be drafted in the second round, things like that. I have him, like I have a mock draft coming out on Tuesday. I have Janai Broome in that mock draft. He's been outstanding defensively this year. He has been phenomenal as a, limited usage, doing his job offensive player around those guards at Auburn that really, take up a ton of the usage, obviously. I don't know, man. Like I'm really intrigued by this Auburn team. And I think that they are the kind of team that could really cause problems for Connecticut if they get past Yale and then the San Diego State UAB matchup.
Yeah, I always try to be completely transparent. Broome is not a guy that was like crazy on my radar. And it's funny that you talk about him today, because today was the first time I had somebody text me about him like, hey, what are your thoughts on Janai Broome? And I'm like, honestly, like I mean, I watch Auburn. I know the players. I was a little more locked in early in the year when I thought like, okay, what is Aiden Holloway going to be and all of that. And as that kind of fizzled out, I lost like a little bit of my focus and really, I check box scores and all of that. He's a guy he's the one name on my list right now, Sam, of guys I need to go back to watch film. Like I need to get caught up on what I have missed with Janai Broome. And so I'm really intrigued. Like the statistical profile is really interesting with his size. He can shoot it, block shots, rebounds. I know Jalen Williams. What are your thoughts on Jalen Williams? He's a guy that I feel like people have talked about a little bit. You think there's a real chance there for him, at least in these conversations?
Yeah, for sure. Big 6'8" athlete who can shoot a little bit, defends really well, runs that weak side defense really, really well. He helps Janai Broome out a lot, being able to block shots, rotating across the play. I would like to see him like be able to handle the ball a little bit better for sure. But, when you're that big and you can shoot a little bit, I think you have a chance for sure. They're a dangerous team for Connecticut. Like they are one of the teams that could like be faster than Connecticut, as well as match up on the interior with the Huskies as well. I think it's crazy that they're a 4 seed. I think it's crazy that they put them in the same bracket with the number 1 seed. I feel bad for Connecticut. I think Connecticut will be favored in that game to be sure. Connecticut is an outstanding basketball team, but it's way harder now for them to get through having Auburn in that same, 8-team window, basically.
I think that'd be an interesting game for Caravan because who does he match up with that? And with that front court,
probably Jalen Williams.
And so that I think that would be really interesting for me to see with Caravan in terms of somebody of that size with that strength and how Caravan could hold up with that. So that would be a really interesting matchup for me to watch Caravan defensively.
Yep. Next up here is BYU and Duquesne. Look, I'm not wildly enthused about like BYU Duquesne because again, I think this is more of like a 14 seed matchup, not a typical like 6-11 seed matchup. But look, BYU's offense is fantastic to watch.
Yeah.
They really score the basketball. They're efficient as hell. They shoot a ton of threes. I really enjoy watching them. Jackson Robinson is a guy that gets some NBA evaluators excited. I love watching Ali Khalifa kind of run the show for them. Oh my
gosh, man.
Passing and playmaking as well. Yeah, just a really, really fun team to watch. I don't know if they're a Final Four contender or anything because they would really, really have to sit down and defend at a high level, but they are absolutely like a Sweet 16, Elite 8 team potentially that could get that far because look at the 2 seed in that region is Iowa State. They've beaten Iowa State this year already. So could be fun if they can kind of get through all of that.
Yeah. Jackson Robinson is the name. If you're looking for NBA draft, focus, Ali Khalifa is the fun one to watch on that team. Like that. I've watched plenty of BYU games trying to scout Robinson and figure out what I thought. And often I've said this, other players don't catch my eye, Sam. Khalifa, caught my eye every time I watch. Like he really, the way he passes and moves the ball and all of that is really fun.
So this next matchup is Morehead State and Illinois State. And this is a game that I definitely will have my eye on because it's a fascinating kind of blend of, okay, Illinois, they like to try and get up tempo. Morehead State likes to play snail's pace, right? Illinois has a team that frankly, from time to time can make some mistakes and can go through like shooting cold spells. Damask has not really made shots this year. Coleman Hawkins can go through cold spells. Guerrier can go through cold spells. Shannon can go through cold spells, right? Morehead State has a real dude in Riley Minix. He's like a 6'7", like wing kind of player who rebounds well, who can step away and shoot, can drive in a straight line. I'm really, really interested to see whether or not Morehead State can kind of grind that game down to a halt and really make it a competitive matchup. I feel like that's the 3-14 where just because I feel like Illinois can be a little bit up and down, sometimes. Like they've lost to Penn State, they lost to Maryland this year, and they played some like weird games where like they beat Maryland by 5, and like a game against Minnesota was a little bit like tight going down the stretch. And then this game early in the conference tournament against Ohio State was really tight. They're a really good team. Like they just won the Big Ten tournament, right? Like I don't want to sit here and like diminish what Illinois has done. I think they're a really, really great team, but I do think this is an intriguing 14 seed to put with them, at least in terms of the matchup.
For those that don't know, Riley Minix is a 23-year-old transfer who played 4 years of NAIA and then has come to Morehead, averaging over 20 points, shooting 34% from 3. But guys, this is a career 80% plus free throw shooter. Like had a year at NAIA where he shot almost 50% from 3 on 7 attempts, rebounds the ball, averaging over 3 offensive rebounds. Like he's this wing forwardy, can do some stuff in the post, like just a really interesting player. Like somebody puts in the chat, might be a two-way guy. Like, yeah, I'm sure Riley Minix is a guy we see at Summer League in some capacity. Like how many minutes and how real that is, I don't know. But he's like a guy that, again, I had an NBA draft scout text me and say, hey, go watch this kid. Let me know what you think. So he's on teams' radars. I don't know how crazy serious it is, but it's opportunities like this, right? Like whether Morehead pulls off the upset or not, that, gets a kid like that playing at Morehead State even more of an opportunity to show what he's about.
Look, I would take Illinois in this game, but
Yeah.
I think that there's a chance that like we look up early on and that this is kind of a tight one.
Yeah.
This is one where like we look and we shouldn't be surprised if Morehead is, slowing this thing down and trying to make it tough for Illinois. But this is a big scouting game because people really do want to see Riley Minix against some really high level players. For what it's worth, Morehead State has played Alabama and Purdue this season, and it frankly just like did not go super well in either of those games, but they played Indiana within 1 earlier this year. And, Indiana was kind of a mess at that point. And it seemed like, they were taking some time, but they are an intriguing matchup, I think, for Illinois to watch for. Next, like little 4 group of teams here: Washington State and Drake, Iowa State and South Dakota State. The Washington State Drake game is one I'm really looking forward to because I really just want to see Tucker DeVries kind of go off a little bit here.
Yeah. No, what's up with his draft stock, Sam? He's not a guy we've talked about at all this year. He was a guy that had some buzz last year. And then I believe there was an off-season surgery, if I'm not mistaken, right? And, but I feel like he hasn't been able to regain any buzz this year. Where are you at with him? Or maybe even more important, as much as you can tell us, what are NBA teams thinking about Tucker DeVries?
Yeah, they're really excited to see him, hopefully get a win against Washington State and then get a matchup against Iowa State, right? The key here is that he can really shoot and he thinks the game at a super high level. Like their whole offense is built off of running him off of crazy off-ball actions and getting him open shots, either off of curls into the mid-range where he can use his touch that way, or off of 3-pointers where he's like an elite movement shooter. Like you look at the 36% from 3 this year, 36% from 3 last season. The degree of difficulty on these shots that you're going to see in this game against Washington State, crazy, like completely crazy. It's just athleticism. That's the big question. Like teams want to see, can he actually deal athletically against some of these, teams that will speed him up? Like Iowa State would be a great NBA prospect matchup for him.
Yep.
Because Iowa State with guys like Keyshawn Gilbert, even like Taman Lipsey, like really getting into his space at times, on digs, on, potential scramble closeouts, things like that. I really think that would be a great prospect matchup for scouts to know everything that they need to know about him. But don't sleep on the Washington State game either.
Yeah.
Washington State, like they have a really high level top 30 defense in the league. They have another guy in Jalen Wells who's like 6'8", can really shoot the basketball. Another guy that NBA scouts like want to get a decent look at least as a junior that came up from the JUCO ranks last year. I don't know, man. Like, I'm really, really interested in this matchup, and I think it's going to be one of the more fun, competitive games of the first round.
Yeah. I'm looking at that next one for Iowa State. I think Keyshawn Gilbert had some good games in the Big 12 tournament. Milan Momcilovic had a really good conference championship, and all of a sudden I saw Twitter buzzing about him again just because of his size and shot making ability. He had like a stupid one in the corner in front of his own bench that was just ridiculous. Both of those guys, I think if Iowa State goes on a run, I'm a little higher on like Keyshawn Gilbert than Tamin Lipsey because that's just where I'm at. I think if either of those guys, both of them, whatever, if Iowa State really goes on a run, if Keyshawn is defensively what he's been all year and then maybe makes some shots, has some moments, if Momcilovic really shoots it and, maybe play some good defense, it'll be interesting what could happen with those guys' stocks, whether it's this year or just even, for a year from now. But I think Iowa State's an interesting team, and those guys specifically off their team with NBA draft look ahead.
Yeah, what I would say about Momcilovic, I do think he should go back.
Yeah.
You look at his numbers late in the Big 12 season: 6 points against Kansas State, 0 points against Kansas State, 6 points against BYU, 4 points against Oklahoma, 8 points against West Virginia, 9 points against Houston, 2 points against Cincinnati, 5 points against TCU. That's all since February 10th.
Yeah.
He outside of that, game against Houston, really, in the title game where he drilled 4 threes, it was really starting to slow down, and he was hitting the freshman wall a little bit. So I would say he's one that should probably return. But Iowa State is a great defensive team, and they have a great backcourt in Lipsey and Keyshawn Gilbert. And I'm with you that I think Keyshawn Gilbert is the much more interesting NBA prospect. But yeah, this is a team that I think could make a decent sized run. Drake is an intriguing matchup for them. Certainly Illinois would be an intriguing matchup for them. I think that they'd probably just cause turnovers from Illinois' backcourt, and that they would really be able to cause them issues. That'd be BYU. BYU has beaten them. If BYU can upset Illinois potentially in the round of 32. And then at the top, you have Connecticut, where, they could try and speed up Connecticut's guards. It's an intriguing one. It's a really, really intriguing one, I think, with Iowa State.
Yeah. I mean, as you run through those, I'm just going, Keyshawn Gilbert has a chance to really show what he can do defensively. Tucker DeVries potentially, Terrence Shannon Jr. potentially. Like I say, they've already played BYU. And then if, obviously the Connecticut guards and Cam Spencer and Tristan Newton. So, some big time opportunities if they can win some games and make a little run.
Yep. Any overall thoughts on the East? I would say that Connecticut is certainly my favorite. This is by far the strongest region to me.
Yeah.
I don't really even think it's a question. This is by far the toughest region. I'm intrigued by an Auburn-UConn matchup. I honestly think that would be, of any potential matchup in this region, the one I would look forward to the most. I would love to see Auburn and Connecticut, just in terms of, matchups, athletic Auburn guards going up against Connecticut's ruthless efficiency, Janai Broome against Donovan Clingan. There are a lot of really interesting matchups there that I think could be great if we get it, but it's just kind of a loaded region. There's not really another way to say it.
I think we get an Iowa State versus either Connecticut or Auburn Elite Eight. I think Connecticut would win that matchup and go to the Final Four. If it was Iowa State Auburn, I would have it a little bit more 50-50. But I have a hard time picking against Auburn right now, against Connecticut, with just the guard play, the pedigree, the coaching, the size. It just seems like a very well-constructed team, very well-coached team. They have the confidence and the swagger and the attitude. They have the guard play. Tristan Newton's had some crazy big games from the guard, experience. It's just, they're pretty good, man. They're pretty good.
So in terms of the team I would pick Connecticut. The upset watches, to me, I think UAB is at least, in that ballpark against San Diego State. I think Morehead State, watch early on. That could be an intriguing one, depending on how they can control pace in that game. And then Drake against Washington State in the 7-10 would be the other ones. Other than that, I don't see crazy, number of live upset picks there, but I am intrigued by the region as a whole. Okay, next up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just say, if you made me pick an upset, I probably would go the Drake Washington State. I like some of the 12-5s in other regions, not in this one as much.
I think that's right. Okay, next up, the West region, which I think is probably the least strong region out of any of these. North Carolina will play either Howard or Wagner. Have you watched North Carolina recently? I feel like among the great teams this year, I'm just going to be honest, they're the team that my eyes drift to the least. I know that they play great defense. I think that's the thing I've been most impressed with this season. RJ Davis has been a fantastic shot maker. The other thing that I will point out, I've bagged on Armando Bacot defensively for a couple of years. Like, I think that he's struggled on that end here and there. I think he's been really, really good defensively this year. I thought he had a real case to be like all defense ACC this year. And, do I think it'll all translate to the NBA? I don't really, but I do think that he deserves a lot of credit for how he's improved over the years defensively for that North Carolina team.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the same spot as you. I'm not sure how confident I am in them, how good I think they are. Where they don't have any big time draft prospects, I can't say I've really, really tuned into them. I mean, who's the most intriguing prospect on that team? I mean,
it's probably Cadeau long term.
Cadeau long term. Harrison Ingram is maybe made a little bit of noise with the up, the 3-point percentage up at 37. He's rebounded the ball really well, but I don't know that I have strong thoughts or strong confidence in this North Carolina team either way.
Yeah, I think I'm confident in them because they're old and they just really bring it defensively every night. They execute at a high level with, older guards like RJ Davis and Cormac Ryan, right?
Yeah.
Another sneaky guy on their team that I've always thought is an interesting prospect is Jalen Washington. He plays here and there for them now. It seems like, he's somewhere between an 8 and 12 minute a game guy, depending on, what they have. He'll play a lot more next year, with Bacot out of there finally. And I wonder if he could emerge as somebody that is intriguing as an NBA prospect, but they're going to play Howard or Wagner. Wagner is kind of a snail in terms of, how they play basically. Howard has Seth Towns and, has a horrendous defense that I think is really going to struggle to stop anybody point blank. I think I would probably pick Howard from a talent perspective, but I do like the variance teams with snail's paces like Wagner. Tough one in the play-in game. I don't really need to spend a crazy amount of time on it. Mississippi State against Michigan State. Another matchup where I'm really intrigued to see Josh Hubbard against some of Michigan State's old guards. I've really enjoyed the Josh Hubbard, shot making experience this year. The guy just fires that ball up from 3 all game. Cam Matthews is a guy that, man, I wish he could shoot because he is a killer defensive player at Mississippi State. Tolu Smith, another guy I really wish could shoot because he's a killer defensive player. I wish that, this team is not as bad as it was shooting last season, but I wish they just had a little bit more because I trust them on defense. I trust them athletically. Michigan State's a little bit older, obviously. Tom Izzo has an incredible track record in March. I just every time I've watched this Michigan State team, I've just been so disappointed in them. I think they've lost 6 of their last 8 or something like that, 5 of 7 maybe. It just feels like a team that is, typically Izzo teams are peaking when they get to March. This one seems like it's slowing down a little bit.
Yeah, it's so hard, right? You get into bracket play, and it's you see Michigan State and you're I got to pick them, or selection or whatever, whenever you're picking your brackets. And, there's some names here that people recognize with Hogard and Akins and Walker. They had a couple exciting freshmen and Xavier Booker and Cohen Carr who, have played, some minutes here and there, but haven't made like crazy impacts in their freshman season. So it's almost like, okay, does Izzo have this super experienced team that's all of a sudden going to make this run? And it's hard to go against them. But yeah, this matchup is interesting in terms of not a whole lot of NBA draft prospects in this specific one. Some guys maybe down the line, that I've mentioned. I know you talked about the Mississippi State guys, but if we're just looking at draft stuff, not as much. But I think it'll be an interesting game just to see. And then maybe, the winner comes out and gives North Carolina a test, just because they'll be well coached. Mississippi State playing their defense. And so.
Yeah, Izzo is a great tournament coach. Obviously, I think Chris Jans is a really underrated coach nationally. Just as a guy that consistently coaches great defenses, brings toughness. Every single place that he goes, seemingly only recruits kids that are incredibly tough and really have that mindset of being fearless in a real way. So look, I think I'd pick Michigan State here, but I'm not, this is a toss up totally in every way, shape, and form. Next, St. Mary's and Grand Canyon, Alabama and Charleston. The St. Mary's Grand Canyon game is going to be incredibly fun.
Awesome.
Another matchup that is just such a pure like style clash to me, because if you look at the pace, like Grand Canyon, it doesn't look like they're getting up tempo like a crazy amount, but they do like to push when they can with Tyon Grant Foster, Ray Harrison. They want to try and go if they're able to. St. Mary's obviously plays snail's pace, going to try and slow things down. Great defensive team, has great guards in Gus Marshallonis and Aiden Mahaney. They are without, it seems like, Joshua Jefferson moving forward. It's going to be intriguing to see what they are capable of without him. They did just beat Gonzaga to win the WCC tournament, which was not a result that I personally expected with how well Gonzaga was playing. This one, Grand Canyon, I do think they will have the best player on the court in Tyon Grant Foster. I think that St. Mary's, though, unfortunately for Grand Canyon, has a really good matchup for them because Mitchell Saxon is one of the most underrated defensive players in the league, or in the country, really. He won Defensive Player of the Year in the WCC. This is a team that does prefer to drive and attack the rim if they can in Grand Canyon. It's a good matchup for us to learn what we can about Grant Foster, I think, in terms of his execution offensively as an older player. I do think I will pick St. Mary's in this game, though.
Yeah, I think I'm with you as well. So Tyon Grant Foster, 24 years old, just turned 24 earlier this month. Started out JUCO, spent a year at Kansas, was at DePaul for a little bit. And then now he's averaging almost 20 a game on, 45, 33, gets to the free throw line almost 8 times a game. Like the games I've watched, there's no doubt about it. This guy can score the basketball, takes a lot of usage, does it with the ball in his hands. And so, I think you said it perfectly. We get to find out what Tyon Grant Foster, can he do it efficiently? Can he do it against a defense like this that's had, 3 days to scout for him? I believe this is a Thursday game, or is it a Friday game? Friday game. So they'll have even a little extra time. But yeah, I think my biggest takeaway is I probably am picking St. Mary's to win, but I'm fascinated to see, because Tyon Grant Foster is, he's been on my radar all year. This is the perfect game to get a little more intel and a really good data point for his draft prospect.
The other matchup in this little quadrant is Alabama Charleston. Charleston, again, plays a very modern offense. They love to fire the ball from three. They finish reasonably well for, who they are in terms of size around the basket. Ante Brezovic is a fantastic interior player who can step out and shoot threes occasionally. Rain Smith, shout out my Australian brethren here. Rain Smith, really intriguing player who can score with the best of them, really loves to fire the ball up from three at a high level. This is going to be one of the fastest, most up-tempo, high-scoring games, because I don't know about you. I do not think that Alabama can defend, like, point blank. And I think Charleston can score. Like if Alabama goes cold from behind the 3-point line, we really could be in for a game. I'm picking Alabama here because I think these are two teams that stylistically play very similar. And I trust a team with older guards and Mark Sears, Aaron Estrada, Latrell Wrightsell to like figure it out and make it work. But if those guys go cold, this could be a really intriguing one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a fun game, just like you say, teams getting up and down, shooting a lot of threes, scoring the basketball. And whenever you get into that, all it takes is one cold stretch, one hard stretch or hot stretch, from the other team. And it can turn the tides a little bit. From a draft perspective, of course, people will know the name Grant Nelson, played at Alabama this year, around this time, a little before this last year, got a ton of buzz on social media and, entered and then came back, transferred to Alabama. I don't know. I don't know if his stock is better or worse this year or not. That's probably the biggest name people would know for NBA draft purposes. I don't think Charleston has anybody that's really on the radar, and Alabama, as much as they score the ball and as good as some of these guys are, Nelson's probably still the biggest name.
I think Nelson's the biggest name. Rylan Griffin continues to be the guy on Alabama that I'm most intrigued with long term as a prospect. 6'6", 190 pounds, very skinny, but okay on defense and can really shoot. Like, classic 3-and-D kind of player. He should absolutely go back to Alabama, like no questions asked. But a player that long term I think could be something. The other guy here that people were excited about in the preseason, I've never really totally gotten it, is Jaren Stevenson.
Yeah.
6'11", 7'4" wingspan. He's just very young. He's not a guy that like will play an immediate impact role within this game, I don't think either. Let's go to the bottom part of this region. Yep. Clemson, New Mexico, Baylor, Colgate. Clemson, New Mexico is absolutely going to be one of the most fun matchups of the first round. This is one where I will be picking New Mexico. New Mexico, the 11 seed, they are favored in this matchup, -2.5 right now against Clemson. This New Mexico team is so talented. They are really, really loaded. I'll ask you this. Who is your favorite player on this New Mexico team?
Donovan
Because
Dent.
every time I watch them, it's not even close to me. It's absolutely Donovan Dent. I'm so glad that you said that, because people bring up like JT Toppin, they bring up House, they'll bring up Mashburn to me, and I'm just like, Donovan Dent is the guy that like completely runs this shit. Every time I watch them, I'm just like, decision making, footwork, touch around the basket, finishing, playing, like all of it across the board. I think Donovan Dent next year, look, we live in a transfer portal era, right? He could be at New Mexico. He could be somewhere else, wherever he is, right? If you told me he's an All-American next year, I would not be surprised.
So I'm going to drop. I'm not going to, because I told myself I wouldn't. I can't say exactly what's in my notes, but a game versus Colorado State, I said his passing is explicitly nice. That's what I wrote in my notes, because he operates the ball screen like a maestro. He has some of the best passing. And listen, JT Toppin may be the better long-term NBA prospect. Like, I don't know, like I'm interested in him as well. And Jalen House is a good player. Like, they have a lot of good players. I am enamored whenever I watch Donovan Dent play. Like, it's not even close, just in terms of who's the most aesthetically pleasing. It's absolutely him. So this is an interesting game, because we've talked about a really talented New Mexico team. PJ Hall is, the highest probably prospect in this game, at least for the 2024 draft. So I'm interested to see him in this one as well against Toppin and this New Mexico team. So this one popped off the screen immediately when we saw this matchup.
Yeah, so New Mexico can really speed you up. That's their goal. They also have bodies to throw at guys down low. JT Toppin is a super athlete at 6'9". Nelly Jr. Joseph, he was at Iona playing under Rick Pitino. Big physical dude that will like throw his weight around in a real way. Mustafa Amziel was at Dayton for a while, a guy that, got some publicity, I think, early in his career, but like a really, really good sixth man now for New Mexico. And then they have Jalen House and Jamal Mashburn, like two older guards that can really get hot. Like Jalen House can go when he gets hot. Like he can really, really shoot the ball and go crazy. I think that this New Mexico team has a real chance to make a run here. If they made the Sweet 16, I would not be surprised. If they made the Elite Eight, I would not be surprised. I don't know if I would go as far as Final Four, but every time I watch New Mexico, I am blown away by their talent, at least. Whether or not they're going to be able to sit down and defend and stay consistent kind of remains to be seen. They do have a top 25 defense this year, but for instance, Air Force, it's hard for me to get the Air Force game out of my head because I did watch that because I was very curious about how the hell they lost it. When you lose to Air Force, there are problems on the defensive end of the court. Teams that can really like kind of spread them out and space out the guys like Nelly Jr. Joseph and Mustafa Amzil and play like pseudo 5-out basketball like Air Force does with Petritis. They can cause some issues at the very least. So that could be a problem with Baylor potentially playing 4-out with Missy. Could be a problem with Clemson playing 5-out with PJ Hall, certainly. But yeah. I do think that New Mexico is the more talented team among this group, much as I love PJ Hall.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, this little pocket is probably the pocket I'm most excited about in terms of overall draft perspective from 8 teams. And I know we'll get to the other pocket of 4 in a second, but you get PJ Hall with Clemson, the guys we talked about for New Mexico. Baylor would most likely be their second round matchup, although shout out Colgate, Patriot League stand up. But Baylor with Jacoby Walter, Yves Misi, and Jalen Bridges. Like, these are guys I've said multiple times now. I just want more and more data truly on at least 2 of them. Like Bridges, I feel like we kind of know. But these other 2 guys, I'm still trying to get more data to kind of figure it out.
Bryce is just out here saying, please get Matt Langle out of the Pat League. Somebody hire Matt Langle, for the love of God, get him out of this league so American has a chance to make the tournament once again. Is the last time American made the tournament is when you were there?
No, there's been a year since. So
there's been a year since.
Yeah.
So Colgate, really ruthless, execution team offensively. Like, that's what they do as much as anything. Look, their defense is better than it's been previously. I don't think they have quite as much juice as they had offensively like 2 years ago, even like last year. I mean, that team was absolutely sick offensively, and they were only a 15 seed. Like, they were way underseeded, I felt like. I don't feel like this team is quite as good as the past couple Colgate teams, which makes me think that Baylor is probably going to be able to get this done. But man, like, Jacoby Walter needs to have a good tournament. Like, there is not a crazy amount of excitement about him among scouts that I talk to right now. Like, look, he'll go in the first round and everything. But like, compared to where his draft stock seems to be for people, I get a lot of questions about Jacoby Walter, I would say.
Yeah, I have him in a weird range right now where like it could still be in the lottery, but it could definitely fall outside of the lottery. And it'll be interesting. And then I think Misi on the other side is I've become more intrigued throughout the year. Like, he was a name I knew coming into the year and seen some progress throughout the season. But again, that's why I've continued to say, like, I want more and more data with these guys. And, we'll get some here against Colgate. And then whether it's Clemson or New Mexico that wins that game, I think we'll get some really good data in that second round, assuming Colgate doesn't pull the upset, of course.
Yeah, and look, like, this Colgate team is a little bit bigger than the teams we've seen in the past. Jeff Woodward and who's the other one? Keegan Records, if I remember correctly. Like, they're both like, 6'9", 6'10", 6'11" dudes who can throw their weight around a little bit, like big physical dudes. It will be fun to see how Yves Misi kind of handles those.
Sure.
Things.
For sure. Yeah.
Is older, more physically, developed players. Last little pocket here in the West: Dayton, Nevada, Arizona, Long Beach State. Dayton, Nevada is at least intriguing. Dayton obviously has Deron Holmes, a guy that, Bryce and I have been really high on throughout the year. Nevada has Kenan Blackshear, Gerard Lucas, Trey Coleman, like some older, backcourt players, as well as, they're just like this big, weird, like unwieldy kind of, mix of 6'5" to 6'8" guys that can kind of switch actions, and then they can play 5-out because Nick Davidson, their center, can step out a little bit and shoot. Like, Nevada is a tricky team to play.
It'll be interesting because then you have like Dayton, who plays extremely slow. That'll, put Deron Holmes in a situation where he has to guard. I think he can move and do that, but I think it'll be good for, maybe scouts to see him in that situation against that type of team. This was a team that unfortunately, they lost in the first round of their conference tournament. That wasn't a great loss for them, to that Duquesne team that we talked about earlier. They had missed their starting point guard, Javon Bennett, for a few games. He was back for that one, but it was the first one back. So maybe it's a little bit of a wake-up call for them or something after a pretty solid year throughout the season. So I'm excited to see Holmes in the NCAA tournament. I think he's really good. I think he's an All-American, and I think putting him on this stage, hopefully for at least a couple games, I would love to see obviously them win and then see him go against Arizona, which is where he went to high school in Arizona. Would just love to see that matchup against that front line that Arizona has. I think he would rise to the occasion. I think it'd be great for, again, another data point for his NBA draft potential.
Yeah, the problem with Dayton is they've just been such a fundamentally different team since Malachi Smith went out. It just feels really, really hard for them every time that I kind of see them.
Yeah. It can be at times.
Yeah. It just feels like a slog on offense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it is slow, and in times it's really tough. And yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, I wish that if they had Smith, I'd be like, this is a team that can really do things to me.
Yep.
But yeah, Deron Holmes, look, he's got enough juice to and that's an advantageous matchup for him on the block. That's an advantageous matchup for him, being able to score in the post and being able to do some things there. So
yeah,
if he can do that, it's a really, really good situation for him to get to that Arizona game. Arizona, Long Beach State, look, great story. Unbelievable story. Dan Monson is fired currently, and he led that team to the Big West tournament title, right? Unbelievable story. Going to be hard for them to match up with Arizona, I think.
It's going to be tough. Yeah. I think for me, the guys I'm really, again, is Palo Larson and Keyshawn Johnson. I'm really intrigued to watch these guys. Obviously, Johnson made a run last year with a different team in the tournament, now with Arizona. And then obviously the storyline that came out right away was if both teams make it, we could have Caleb Love versus North Carolina in the Elite Eight. So always kind of interesting to see those storylines. But from a strictly NBA draft, and I'll say this too, not for this year, but KJ Lewis is a guy that I'm really interested by for the future. Krevis is another one. So seeing those guys.
Yeah, that's the question I wanted to ask you. Who is your favorite Arizona prospect?
Long term, I find myself gravitating to KJ Lewis. Is that crazy?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It would be KJ for me as well. Has Caleb Love made a reappearance for you?
Yeah, I guess. I consider him, if we did a 2-round mock right now, I wouldn't draft him. Maybe, I don't know if he wouldn't end up there, but he's a guy that is very much on my radar whenever you get into the end of the second round, undrafted, two-way conversations. So, he scored the ball really well, yes, he's somewhere on my mind whenever we have these conversations. Is that fair?
I kind of think that he has put himself back on the radar in a real way. Caleb Love deserves a lot of credit for how he's come in and done a great job of, I don't want to say tempering his game, but he has tempered his game a little bit. Last year was a mess, but he has tempered his game in a real way. Okay. We're going to the South region. So that's your top right region. Houston against Longwood. Houston is a really fun team, a really, really fun basketball team. If people haven't watched them a lot this year, and I hope you have, because they're on ESPN enough, they slow the game down. They are tough. They are physical. They are aggressive defensively. They crush the glass on the offensive end. I have so much respect for the way that they play. I think Jamal Shed is a real potential NBA draft prospect in the second round. Jaywan Roberts, Javier Francis. I mean, LJ Cryer can really shoot the ball. Like Emmanuel Sharp has had a great season. It's just a really, really good basketball team and a really, really deep old team that you just believe is you're going to get the best from them every single night.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a team that could really make a run, especially if that backcourt duo can really score the ball and really plays well, right? Like they didn't, Iowa State kind of went in there and gave them a little bit of their own medicine, and like their offense got very stagnant. They were just taking tough contested shots and not making them, got them out of their rhythm a little bit. I would anticipate they learn from that and grow and get better and get ready to make this run. Can't imagine they have much trouble in the first round. They'll be ready. Long-term run, I think it's really going to be dependent on that backcourt. Like how good can Shed and LJ Cryer be?
Yeah, the Llama Whisperer brings up, I've heard Shed comparisons to a Van Vliet Brunson outlook. I don't think Jamal Shed is anywhere near that offensively. Those guys have always had like real touch as shooters, but defensively, like he is not far off what Fred was at Wichita State, is like a smaller guard who uses his hands like at an exceptional level. I think he has a real shot to be a good backup point guard in the NBA.
Yeah, that's kind of where I have him right now on my board, would be the range of that, whether you take him in the second round and he becomes that right away, or maybe not in the second round, but undrafted free agent that gets a guaranteed contract or a two-way and works his way up, something like that. I very much am in that realm with Jamal Shed.
Next up here, shout out Logan Eby for joining. Showed up late, just got to the portion on Nebraska. Student there. Thanks for the recognition, but thoughts on us being seated to play where our AD just left to go on both the men's and the women's side. For people who are not aware, Trev Alberts just left Nebraska to go become the athletic director at Texas A&M, and they play Texas A&M on the men's side and on the women's side. The two committees matched up, Nebraska and A&M. I've never seen anything like that. Fascinating situation. I'd imagine Trev Alberts is not super happy about that deal. Shout out Logan for the super chat, and shout out Logan for bringing that up, because I probably would have forgotten to bring it up, and it's a hilarious thing that happened. Yeah. Look, Texas A&M is playing much better. They've just been so hit or miss throughout the year. And it's always been this way with like these weird Buzz Williams teams. Like they lost 5 in a row from February 13th to February 28th. Then as March started, they won 5 in a row, including a win against Kentucky and a win against Mississippi State. They lost to Florida in a really tough SEC semifinal game. They really are a tough team to watch on offense. They have the 345th effective field goal percentage this year. They make 28% from 3. And you know what? It almost doesn't matter, because they get 42% of their offensive rebounds. So they still have a top 35 offense in college basketball. Them against Nebraska is kind of a fun matchup, in large part because Nebraska is a really bad defensive rebounding team in general. Like they were 11th in the conference in defensive rebounding. They're 223rd nationally. I really wonder if guys like Rink Mast, the Alec kid, I forget his first name, like can those guys, Bryce Williams, like control the glass in the way that they need to? This one just comes down to, does Nebraska make shots or not?
Yeah.
If Nebraska makes shots, I think that they have a real shot to win the game. If Nebraska does not make shots, I think Texas A&M will win this like relatively easily.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, as you were talking through that, I was like, this sounds like a game where if Tominaga, one of the more exciting players to watch, I love watching him run around and knock down shots. Kisei, if they make shots, then they have a real chance. And I'll be honest, like Fred Hoiberg has become a coach that I've really enjoyed, really a big fan of, and had a really good year this season at Nebraska. They've been super successful. And so I hope that they get in there and they're able to find a way to get a win. But yeah, I mean, whenever you have a team like A&M that rebounds the way they do offensively, that can cause issues, if you don't really check a man out and just, so if they can match them physically, Nebraska has a real chance. NBA draft prospects wise, I'm not sure this isn't one of the games where I think there's going to be a whole lot of spotlight on either team.
No, I don't believe so either. But a potentially weird, game that, if you end up with Houston and Texas A&M, that game's going to be like completely unwatchable, like truly just like utterly unwatchable in, physicality and, just a total mess on the interior, but it'll be like kind of fascinating in a few different ways because of that. Next little quadrant here, Wisconsin, James Madison, Duke, Vermont. Wisconsin, James Madison will be a very popular upset pick. James Madison is 31-3 this year. They have won 13 straight games. The only two teams they have lost to this season are Southern Miss and App State. Appalachian State was a top 80 team in the country this year. They were a great basketball team, but outside of that Michigan State win in overtime to start the season, they have not beaten a single other top 100 team in the country. Do you think that Wisconsin should be on upset watch here, Bryce?
I mean, it's 12-5. So at the end of the day, no matter what the teams are, there's always an upset watch there. Wisconsin's an interesting team, just the way they play, like, so physical and strong. AJ Storr has been, interesting player. So, I mean, I think they should be on upset watch. I haven't even started to fill out my brackets. I'm not sure. I'd want to dive in a little bit more into James Madison. Even Wisconsin, I haven't watched enough of this year just because they even are a little low. Like, there's not a bunch of like NBA draft prospects there. Connor Esigian actually was the kid that was a freshman last season, and then, for whatever reason, kind of fell out of the rotation as the year went on. So not a team I paid a whole lot of attention to in terms of draft stuff. So I'll have to do a little bit more before I make a final decision on whether this is an upset that I will choose.
Yeah, the big key to me is if TJ Bickerstaff, who is like James Madison's like interior presence, right? Like a really great rebounder on both the offensive and defensive ends of the court, draws a ton of fouls. Can he do anything with Stephen Kroll? And then can Stephen Kroll like kind of bring him away from the basket and with his shooting ability cause him problems that way? Can Tyler Wall kind of help off of, I'd imagine they'll probably give Wall the Terrence Edwards matchup. Or do they use Wall as like kind of the floating help man a little bit in some ways, and then have AJ Storr match up on Terrence Edwards? I think Wisconsin is actually like pretty well roster wise, at least positioned to be able to handle this James Madison team. The key for Wisconsin this year, as it, always has been for them, unfortunately, is, what kind of guard play are they going to get on the offensive end of the court? Yeah. Chucky Hepburn is a fantastic, point of attack perimeter defender. I haven't loved him on offense this season. He hasn't really shot the ball super well. Again, Esigian is a guy that, just didn't emerge this year for any number of reasons. Klesmit knocked down shots from the perimeter and is a consistent shooter. Originally started his career at Wofford, but a guy that, like not like an elite level, like ball handler or anything. They are a little bit bigger than what they've been previously. Yeah. So can James Madison's backcourt kind of speed them up, cause them any sort of issues? Because, this team is a pretty solid defensive backcourt with James Madison at the very least. So that's what I'm kind of looking at there. I do think Wisconsin wins this game though. I know that it's the popular upset pick, but I will take Wisconsin here, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, with Wisconsin, you got to be ready. Like, do you have enough guys to hold up against Tyler Wall backing you down in the mid post, and then AJ Storr being able, like, they can kind of pick out the mismatches they want and then attack you that way. And so you always it's a different, unique way of having to be able to defend, and you got to have the physicality to hold up with those guys.
And then Duke Vermont is intriguing to me. I don't know if Vermont has like enough offensive juice really to keep up with Duke, because Duke can just spread you out 5 out. They can attack you on the interior with Kyle Filipowski. Vermont's defense is pretty solid, but the thing that they don't really do that I think that teams that have had some success against Duke this year have done is I feel like they have tended to kind of try and speed up Duke's guards a little bit with like aggression. Like for instance, that NC State game, right? Like NC State is a team that is really going to try and speed you up and force turnovers. And, I know Duke only had like 9 turnovers in that game, but it felt like to me that guys like Casey Morsell, Jaden Taylor, they really like got into the Duke guards and made their lives a little bit more miserable. Wake Forest is another team, right? Like they're just going to try and play at a little bit of a faster pace, right? And their guards can really go and like have speed to be able to play with you. I don't really think Vermont's guards are going to be able to like pressure in that same way against Duke. So I do think Duke wins this game. And I think we set up for like a really intriguing Wisconsin Duke, potential 5-4 game that I honestly don't know how I would pick, because Krull is a really good matchup on the interior for Filipowski. They could throw Wall on Filipowski at times as well. But then on the other side, like you have Mark Mitchell flying around and help defense. He's a really good matchup for AJ Storr. Like, do you throw like Tyler Wall on like Tyrese Proctor or something like that? Maybe. I don't really know how all of that's going to play out, but I want to see it. And I think that would be like one of the most fun potential second round matchups would be Duke against Wisconsin because of the different ways that they can match up with one another.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that'd be a lot of fun to see how those guys were able to handle that. I think this will be a tournament for Tyrese Proctor. I think that's the guy at Duke that I'm really, really interested to see how he plays throughout this, how many ever games they get. Flip is a guy who I feel pretty comfortable, kind of what he is, what he isn't, what he can do. Jared McCain, same thing. Proctor's really the guy that, again, I'm just interested to see how he plays. And this would be a really interesting matchup against Wisconsin and, what they did with him. And then, if you win that and Houston takes care of their business, then you go play against those Houston guards. Like that would be amazing to see for Tyrese Proctor and even Jared McCain in that situation, even Flip, like where they're going to get physical with Flip. So how does he handle that? So I think Duke's set up to have to play some really physical, defensive minded teams that will give us some pretty good insight on these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Pudge T.O. asks, AJ Storr, 2-way second round guy. I think Storr should probably go back personally. He needs to improve as a decision maker and passer, and then also just keep improving the shot to me. Yep. Down the road, I think this is totally possible. Not for me right now.
Yeah, I would agree. He would not be definitely not a round 2 guy for me in 2024. Maybe you could talk me into a 2-way, but going back seems to make a lot more sense.
I think going back seems to make a lot more sense as well. Next up, Texas Tech and NC State, Kentucky and Oakland. This is our beloved Kentucky Wildcats that we've probably spent more time talking about on this show this year than any team outside of the NBA. Yeah. First, though, let's talk about Texas Tech, NC State. Tech and NC State is like a weird kind of like guards matchup to me, it feels like. Tech has those smaller guys like Pop Isaacs and Toussaint and Chance McMillan and Kerwin Walton. Walton's much more of just like a limited usage sniper from 3, but then you have Darian Williams, who's like this big, 6'6" switchable defender who was at Nevada last year, who I absolutely loved. Man, imagine if he was on Nevada this year, by the way. They would be pretty sick. And then on NC State, it's the same deal, like smaller guards, right? You're talking DJ Horn, Jaden Taylor, Casey Morsell, Michael O'Connell. I've loved, watching NC State's 5-game run through the ACC tournament. They beat both Duke and North Carolina. Having said that, like literally the week before, they lost by 15 to Duke at home. And then on the Saturday previously, they lost by 10 on the road to North Carolina. So I don't really know what to do with that necessarily. I don't know what to do with that information. They did beat Virginia as well in that weird, crazy overtime game where O'Connell hit the like long, miracle shot because Virginia decided not to foul up 3. They go to overtime. NC State handles its business in overtime. I don't totally know what to do with this matchup because on one hand, I really like guards that can speed you up for the tournament. NC State has those guards that can speed you up. But I don't know. I don't know what to do with this thing. This could really go either way to me, given the way these two teams are playing.
You're not all in on the, hey, if the only other team to win 5 games in 5 days is the Kimball Walker Connecticut team, and then what they followed up with a national title. Like you're not all in on DJ Horn and Burns doing the same thing with this NC State team.
I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm just not. I know that Warren Washington is dealing with like a really, questionable injury right now in terms of whether or not he'll be there. To me, that's kind of probably what tells the story of this game. If Warren Washington plays, I think Texas Tech wins because Washington's, just a big body on the interior. He really keys a lot of what they do defensively under Grant McCasland. Without Washington, I don't really love their bodies to be able to deal with DJ Burns on the interior. I mean, DJ Burns.
I love him so much.
Yeah, I mean, he's been great. Winthrop transfer. He's been there for 2 years now and has done a great job of, he makes passing reads at a high level. He's a killer post finisher. I think they need Warren Washington to be at like a real high end level to be able to win this game.
Yeah, no, I enjoy DJ Burns so much, and then DJ Horn can really score, and yeah, it's definitely an interesting matchup in the first round here.
I think that really my pick will just be dependent on Washington. If Washington plays, I think it's Texas Tech. If not, then DJ Burns and NC State go through, and we'll see what it looks like. Kentucky and Oakland. My goodness, this is a really, really fun matchup. I think everybody is kind of wondering if Kentucky is on upset alert here because of the zone. Oakland runs this funky, weird zone that, tries to make lives miserable for opposing teams. I'm not really that worried about this, to be honest, because I think people think of Kentucky in the wrong way. People think of Kentucky as the old John Calipari teams, right? They think of Kentucky as, are they going to execute offensively? Are they going to be able to do this? Are they going to be able to do that? This Kentucky team is, to me, I mean, I don't know what they're ranked. I'll look it up while we're talking, but they are, to me, the best, most explosive offense in the country this year. They play 4 and 5 out. They let these guards get downhill, and they shoot the piss out of the ball. They are shooting 41% from 3 this year. They have Reed Sheppard. They have Rob Dillingham, who can shoot Oakland out of this zone if they want to. I think this is actually a bad matchup for Oakland more than it's a bad matchup for Kentucky. If I was Oakland, I wouldn't want to face a team that just fires away from 3 and has 2 real pull-up 3-point shooters in Reed Sheppard and Rob Dillingham.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just pull up Kentucky stats. First player that shows up, Reeves, 44% from 3. Dillingham, 45% from 3. Reed Sheppard, 53% from 3. And Justin Edwards is even up to 37% from 3. And you can legitimately play those 4 guys on the floor together. And then whatever big man. And if you want to space the floor, okay, let's put a Visich out there and we'll just put 5 guys who can theoretically space the floor, right?
Trey Mitchell shoots the ball from 3 too.
Hey,
go.
Trey Mitchell. Yeah. So I'm not worried about this. That what you brought up was my thing in terms of, is this team going to guard enough to make a real run? That's where I'm I don't have a ton of concerns about them scoring because Reed shoots that thing. Dillingham can score it. Reeves can really score it. As you see, Mitchell can space the floor. I'm not worried about them scoring. It's if I take them on a long run whenever I fill out my bracket, it's because I've somehow talked myself into either they got really good matchups or I think all of a sudden the defense is going to come together throughout this where, Edwards really locks down. Thiero, really locks down. They have some rim protection and, and Cal figures out the lineups.
I actually just love their draw. I think that they are better than the Texas Tech team. I think they're better than NC State, obviously.
Yep.
And I don't think this is a tough matchup. Like, I don't. I think that people look at like, oh God, like John Calipari against zone, these are the teams that have caused him problems before. I do get it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that hasn't happened in the past. It's just a totally different team and a totally different scheme that they're running this year. They go up tempo. They're going to try and just beat Oakland down the floor before they even get into zone, if they can, right? Like, if they can force stops from Oakland, and if their athletes can, be able to stay in front of Oakland's ball handlers and can force stops, they're going to go and they're going to make this thing kind of a blowout in a hurry, I think, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I was trying to pull up the Dayton game to see. Yeah, so like here they played Dayton. Dayton went 18 of 34 from 3. And Dayton is another one of these teams that is a big time 3-point shooting team, but like that just like and Dayton beat them by 24 in that matchup. So with Deron Holmes scored 10 points in that game. So like
they played Drake as well. Drake went 12 of 32 from 3 in that game. Won by 8. They played Ohio State earlier this year. Ohio State went 7 of 25 and won that game by 6 from 3.
Yeah.
Like,
so they beat Xavier by 2. Xavier went 7 of 23 from 3. Like they just didn't shoot it well. I guess if you told me Kentucky, shoots 33s and shoots 26%, okay, maybe there's a chance. I don't think I believe that happens.
Well, and you look at the games that Oakland lost this year too. Like, they lost a game to Green Bay. Green Bay goes 12 of 31 from 3. They lose a game to Northern Kentucky. Northern Kentucky goes 8 of 21 from 3. Not a crazy, number of made shots necessary or a number of threes, but 43% from 3. Wright State went 47% from 3 in a game that they lost. Right. So I'm of the opinion personally that I think this is a good matchup for Kentucky. Their shooters should be able to shoot over the top of Oakland's defense. And I think that they're so fast that they're going to be able to beat Oakland down the court in this game, but we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Next up, Florida against the winner of Boise State and Colorado. Boise State, Colorado, important game. I'm really excited to see like Tyson Degenhart and those dudes at Boise against Tristan Da Silva, KJ Simpson, Cody Williams, the loaded Colorado team talent-wise that drives me absolutely fucking crazy to watch. But like, Colorado should win that game. I think we're in agreement, like talent-wise, that they should win that game. I would love to see Colorado, Florida. I really would.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, this is nothing against Boise and Tyson Degenhart. Like, a guy that I've watched all the way going back to last season. I don't think he's necessarily an NBA guy, but a really, really good player that has got his name out there, and shout out to him for that. But I want more KJ Simpson, Cody Williams, Tristan Da Silva. Like, I want to see some more. I really want to see Cody Williams in this tournament for a few games to see like how he shows up in big moments. I want there to be some big moments where hopefully they move him back into the starting lineup. Hopefully he, can feel fully healthy. I need to see that to really feel a lot more comfortable about my evaluation of him. And yeah, Boise State's good. So we'll get, one right off the bat. And then I would love to see him against Florida. I want to take a moment to shout out Micah Hanlatan. He had an awful, awful injury today. Everybody who saw it, like, we don't need to get into the details, but
he broke his leg.
Broke his leg. Yeah. It was bad. And just wanted to shout him out. Again, a guy who had some NBA draft buzz, maybe not 2024, maybe it's more long-term transfer from Marshall. But just wanted to give him a shout out. But yeah, I think this would be a great matchup. There's some other guys on this Florida team, right? Will Richard is a guy, Walter Clayton. Some people really like Zion Poland. They got a couple bigs off the, Condon off the bench. I don't know if he moves into the starting lineup now. This would be a great, great, great NBA draft matchup for this year and even for the future.
So I would pick Florida against either of these teams, even without Hanlatan. The key for Florida is Florida just likes to throw big bodies at you in waves, right? Like, that's the goal. They're going to throw bigs at you, throw bigs at you, throw bigs at you. That's the goal. Whether or not that, works, doesn't work, we'll see, right? Without Handlockton, it becomes harder to do that.
Sure.
But they have Tyree Samuel. They have, Alex Condon still. I'd imagine that they will start those two. They kill you on the offensive glass. You look at this, for instance, Boise State team. They do a great job on the defensive glass. I do wonder if that's like a bit of a trickier matchup. Colorado does a great job on the defensive glass. Could be a bit of a trickier matchup for Florida in that way. But the thing for me is that Florida has a guy in Zion Poulin that they can throw on to KJ Simpson and really make his life tough. Zion Poulin is an awesome defensive player. I wonder if you throw somebody on KJ Simpson who can make his life harder in terms of shooting, I think that really makes it hard for Colorado to be able to get into what they want to do offensively a lot of the time. And then you have Will Richard that you can throw on to Cody Williams and just like body him up a little bit with his length and strength. Look, as long as Alex Condon shows up in the way that I certainly think he's capable of, here's a little like insider thing. So, Alex Condon last year paired with Ben Henschel, who plays with Perth Wildcats right now, for the West Australian team that played at the U20s here in Australia. Alex Condon won MVP of that tournament. He was ready to go in big moments. Like, I don't think he's going to shrink from this thing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's going to be any circumstance where he's awed by the moment or anything. And on top of it, can kind of step out and shoot a little bit. Like, if they decide to start Eddie Lampkin in that game, it's going to be hard for Eddie Lampkin to deal with either Tyree Samuel or Alex Condon. I would guess that Colorado would go Tristan Da Silva on Condon and then have Lampkin on Tyree Samuel, probably just because Samuel is, a bit less of a shooter and they'd probably be comfortable with that shot coming. But I'm fascinated by Florida is why we talk about this. Like, I think that whatever this matchup is, Boise State or Colorado, it's a great first round matchup. And on top of it, I actually really like Florida's matchup against Marquette, particularly if it gets that far. So we should talk about Marquette here because Tyler Kolek, there's a health issue going on with Kolek right now. Is it a wrist, if I remember correctly? Why is my brain breaking at the moment? Yeah, I can't remember what's up
I
with
thought
Tyler
it
Kolek.
was
It's an oblique injury.
I was gonna say, for some reason, oblique was the thing that popped into my head.
It's an oblique injury. You're 100% right. So he's missed the conference tournament. He missed the last game of the regular season, if I remember correctly, or may have gotten hurt in that game.
Yeah.
He missed the conference tournament, though.
Yep.
The hope is that he'll be healthy enough to play in the NCAA tournament. I would imagine that he will play. I can't imagine Shaka Smart having enough security guards around the Marquette bench to keep Tyler Kolek out of the game in this circumstance. It's just how healthy is he? Like, if Florida can go throw Zion Poulin on Tyler Kolek and kind of take him out of the game a little bit, and then you have these bigs who are going to crash the offensive glass. And what is the thing that you and I have talked about all year with Oso, a guy that we truly adore as a player?
Yeah.
It's rebounding. Like, can he consistently contain the defensive glass for
especially
Marquette?
On the defensive side? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's a tough matchup for Marquette, actually, if they end up with Florida. Florida has to get through the first round, like, no questions asked. But I think that a Florida matchup is tough for Marquette. And Marquette, by the way, in the first round, they have Western Kentucky. I don't know about you. Like, I think that Marquette should be able to handle that team because Western Kentucky just likes to go super up tempo. And Marquette's just going to be better at that than they are at the end of the day.
Yeah, it would be interesting if Florida, like you said, with Hinlock not being there, they don't have as much depth. But it's like, can that front court of Samuel and Condon, like, can they wear down an Eddie Lampkin, right? Where like he's not as effective because they just wear him down. And then, same thing against Marquette. Can they wear down Oso, who's definitely more mobile? I think Oso can hold up, and they have a little more depth there. But it will be interesting if they're able to do that. But like you said, Florida has some of these perimeter defenders to guard a KJ Simpson, who, as much as we both, I think, like Cody Williams and he's a lottery pick, and Even Tristan da Silva is very interesting, whether it's into the first round or somewhere in the second, whatever it is. I think we both would probably agree KJ Simpson's running that team. Like, he's the engine of that team in terms of college
100%.
basketball. And so having anybody who can slow that down. And then I think the same thing with Marquette, right? Like, with Kolek, like if you can slow him down, there's no doubt he's the guy that kind of is the attitude and the heartbeat of that Marquette team. And so if you can even start to do that, that gives you a chance.
Yeah. And, Alex Condon tends to be a guy that likes to pick and pop, right? Hanlockton was their guy that they like to crash the glass with, right? Just dunker spot, pick and rim run to crash the glass. Do they change their strategy at all against Marquette? Just have Condon go, because Condon even has like a 10% offensive rebounding rate, despite the fact that he takes threes, which is super impressive. It shows what their goals are as a team, right? I think Florida is think about the way Michigan State beat Marquette last year. It's very similar in terms of how it all tracks and lines up, I think.
Yeah, no, they're a very, very interesting team. And this is I'm not trying to take shots at anybody. It's interesting to think 5 months ago, the biggest name in that program, an NBA draft prospect, was Riley Kugel for a lot of people. I'm not saying necessarily and they've ended up doing it with him, either not contributing or coming off the bench with his contributions. And again, I'm not taking shots at Riley Kugel. I'm just saying it's kind of crazy. We've got to the year where we can kind of look back and reflect on things and where this Florida team is and what they actually are compared to what a lot of people thought they were going to be. And that included me. I would assume Riley Kugel was their leading scorer, getting a bunch of buckets, and that's not the way things turned out. And they still have, a lot of depth on the perimeter and in the front court.
Yeah. I mean, look, like I'll take some slight shots at Riley Kugel. Like, he just didn't play basketball the right way this year, frankly.
Yeah. Sure.
Seemed to be more about Riley than it did about the team every time he was on the court, and I watched him. So it's disappointing that that's true, but unfortunately it does feel true. They could use him now, though. He didn't play in either of their last two games against Auburn and Texas A&M. He played 16 against Alabama, 21 against Georgia. If he can play, it would be valuable. If he's willing to play within the team context.
That's why I brought it up, is like, we're talking about these guys being able to guard, but at some point there's going to be times where they could use a guy that comes in and gets some buckets. And I mean, if there is one thing Riley Kugel can do, it's that. So
no question. Final thoughts on this region to me is like, I like Kentucky and Houston. I do. I would love to see a Houston-Kentucky matchup in terms of just seeing those guards from Houston defensively against Kentucky's great young guards. Try and like push them out of the game. Kentucky, to me, is the most talented team in the country. They're just young. They can beat anybody on any given night. They can lose to most teams on any given night in this field, at least, right? Like, there's no question that like Kentucky, having lost to LSU this year, having lost to Texas A&M, UNC Wilmington earlier in the year, right? Having played a tight game against Mississippi State, they could lose a 6-11 game to Texas Tech or NC State for sure. But this is a talented enough team to make a real run. And I will have them in the Elite Eight. Like, I can promise you that. I don't know what I would do against Houston, but I will have Kentucky in the Elite Eight here.
Yeah, no, I'm very interested with them because they do have a little bit of older players mixed with plenty of young players, obviously, as well. I think they can really score. I'm not worried about that. Again, like how confident am I that they can stop teams when they need to? So,
and then the final thing I'll bring up is Houston here, right? Houston against Duke, particularly if we get that. The more I think about Duke, the more I wonder if they can get their guards loose a little bit against Wisconsin. Duke against Houston would give us a lot of answers on draft prospects too.
Oh yeah.
This is honestly the region to like pay attention most to draft wise.
I would agree.
If we get Duke and Kentucky through in the way that, you and I think talent wise, they should get through at least.
Yeah. I mean, if you get Duke that has to play against a Wisconsin team and then a Houston team, that also would be, a good evaluation for Jamal Shed. in that game. And then you look down below, you
Totally.
get, Kentucky, we get 2 games of them at least against the zone. So, maybe we just see them, bomb away threes. But then, like you talked about the little guards for NC State and Texas Tech, but then you get Florida, Colorado, potentially Marquette against the winner of that, then Kentucky potentially against the winner of that. Like, this is definitely the region I feel like we're going to get. I guess I'm most excited about if I'm just talking draft prospects. I think this is the one.
I agree. Let's go now. Bottom right to the Midwest, last region. Purdue will take on the winner of Montana State and Grambling. Look, I don't think either Montana State or Grambling really have the juice to be able to give Purdue problems as a 1 seed this year.
Yeah.
I will say, like, Grambling does have like a bigger bodied center in Jonathan Aku, who they can at least throw on Edie. But, this is not a team that forces a number of turnovers like, Fairleigh Dickinson did last year. Not a team that's like really going to pressure the guards. Same with Montana State. Shout out Matt Logie, like coming up from Point Loma and taking that Montana State job and, leading them to the tournament. But to me, I think Purdue is pretty safe here, unlike last season.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have said I first saw anything last year. I'm not going to pretend like I do this year. So I will very quickly mark Purdue into the second round.
Yeah, I will too. Look, I think Purdue is better positioned this year to be okay in those matchups. Look, they still do turn the ball over a little bit more than what you'd like to see, but they have 2 ball handlers now in Braden Smith and Lance Jones. Like, you can have those guys bring the ball up the court. They can match up with you in different ways. They can go smaller with Mason Gillis at the 4. They can go bigger with Trey Kaufman-Wren at the 4 if they need to. You can throw Miles Colvin in there as, your athletic, defensive player if you need to do something. I think Miles Colvin, by the way, have you watched him at all yet this year for Purdue?
I have not. I mean, I've watched them obviously, but with a very almost exclusively eye on Edie.
Yeah. Check out Miles Colvin. He hasn't played a lot, but like interesting long-term player in my opinion. And yeah, look, they're big. They can go Caleb First in there if they need to. Like, they're just a really, really good basketball team. They're a really, really good basketball team this year. And obviously Fletcher Lawyer as well can come in and knock down shots at a high level. He's shooting 44% from 3. Braden Smith is better than he was last year. Braden Smith is a future NBA player, potentially, I think. Has really, matured as a ball handler. This is a really good Purdue team. Utah State and TCU are the 2 teams that, they could end up potentially playing in the second round. TCU, again, with Jameer Nelson and the Tennyson kid and like Avery Anderson, not a team that like pressures the ball like crazy. Like Utah State. TCU does pressure, if I remember correctly. Jameer pressures pretty hard at the point of attack. The other 2 don't really, but Jameer could like cause Braden Smith some problems. Utah State though, like, does not really pressure at the point of attack. I think that this is a good like quadrant foursome here for Purdue to get through.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, these aren't 2 teams that I'm overly familiar with. Again, not a ton of draft prospects. And if some teams don't have draft prospects, but I've caught their games because they've played against them. Obviously, these guys have played some of those games, but for whatever reason, it's worked out that I haven't caught them. So not a ton of thoughts on TCU or Utah State.
Yeah, so Utah State's best player is Great Osabor, who is like this big 6'8", like, post, mid post, kind of 4-5 hybrid. They do have a big body that they can throw at Zach Edey and Isaac Johnson if they need to. Their guards are like pretty good. Like Darius Brown has been really, really good this season for Utah State, but I think that they can beat Utah State. And then TCU, like, I just don't know if they can shoot quite well enough. Like they just don't take a ton of threes. And like the guy who's their, second best 3-point shooter this year really is Emmanuel Miller, and teams just don't guard him a ton out there. So you're going to have to drive into Edey. And I think Edey has gotten really good in terms of being like a drop coverage big and guy who like just is enormous in the paint. I think this is a good quadrant here for Purdue. I think Purdue gets through to the Sweet 16.
Agreed.
And then, if you made me pick a team between Utah State and TCU, I think I would take TCU talent-wise, but I think the world of Danny Sprinkle as a coach, and I wonder if he can kind of game some things up a little bit to make things a little trickier for TCU. Okay. Gonzaga, McNeese State, and Kansas Samford. This is the region where everybody is going to pick upsets. I am here to tell you I will be picking neither of these teams on the upset line. I will be picking Gonzaga, and I will be picking Kansas. So let's start with Gonzaga. Gonzaga has unbelievable guard play right now. Ryan Nembhard is one of the best guards in the country, point blank. If you look at his last, month and a half of basketball, there have been like no issues whatsoever. He's averaging like 15 points, 9 assists, like 1 turnover per game. He's shooting well from the field. He's been truly one of the best guards in the country. They have Anton Watson, who is a terrific 5-year, 2-way player on the wing. Graham Ike is a guy on the interior that I think can cause a lot of problems, either just posting or running ball screens into post-ups. McNeese is not a very big team. I think that they're going to really struggle to deal with Ike on the interior. They are a team that, their whole goal is to try and like force turnovers and to try and make life miserable on the guards, right? I just don't think you can really do that against Nembhard. Like, I think the way Nembhard is playing right now, they have a secondary ball handler in Nolan Hickman. As long as those guys like stay out of foul trouble, I think it's going to be really hard for McNeese to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, it was automatically the one that everybody started to pick, because McNeese has had an awesome year. And so, rightfully so, they're getting some love. And Gonzaga is not as sexy as some other years, right? Like they don't have the big names like they've had in some years past. It would be really kind of interesting if this was a year they, quote unquote, overachieved and made a real run, and, nothing against Purdue, but, upset Purdue or something with this team who, has some guys that are maybe interesting when it comes to NBA draft prospects and NBA radars, but not like those top of the line prospects like we've seen in the past few years. So I'll be honest, like everybody picking this as the upset has almost caused me to kind of sway the other way and like, hold up, like, are we just blowing past the fact that this Gonzaga team is pretty darn good with all the qualities that you outlined as well that makes sense in the matchup?
Totally agree with you. Now the next one is Kansas and Samford. So Samford, playing Bucky ball, right? That's what it's come to be known as due to their coach, Bucky McMillan. They're going to pressure you. They're going to really try and like speed you up at a high level. They have a guy on the interior and a Chor who can kind of step away a little bit and shoot. Shout out Australia. He is Australian. They have a really good former high major guard in Rylan Jones that I like as well. I just think Kansas is going to be able to handle them on the interior. I do. Like,
I mean, it comes down to health, right? Like if McCullough and Dickinson play, then if neither of those guys play, I could absolutely see this upset because they've looked awful in the games without those guys. But I mean, if those two guys play and you have an experienced point guard in DeJuan Harris, like I feel like Kansas would be okay.
I agree with you. I believe in DeJuan Harris to be able to really break that pressure. I do think they will need a second ball handler, which is why it's really important for them. I think that McCullough plays.
Agreed.
I think that they need both McCullough and Dickinson because McCullough works to diminish what could be Samford's greatest strength in that game, which is the ball pressure, forcing turnovers, things like that. Having Dickinson around, I think, accentuates what could be Samford's biggest weakness in this game, which is offensive rebounding, controlling the glass, being able to have enough size and bulk on the interior to deal with Kansas. So this one is really all about like injury stuff for me. If it comes out that McCullough and Dickinson are fine and they're playing and like they didn't play in the Big 12 out of precautionary reasons, I think that Kansas wins like pretty, maybe not easily, but I think they win. The other guy to watch for in this game, Furphy. Furphy's obviously a guy that has gotten some first round buzz, did not play well here the last 4 or 5 games coming down the stretch, had a phenomenal month and a half leading up to that. This is a game that translates really well for him because he is a fantastic transition player. He is great at being able to get up and down the court in a hurry at 6'9" with real athleticism. And he's good at crashing the offensive glass for a wing as well. I think Furphy has a big game against Samford is where I'm at. I think he's actually, Kansas fans are going to be like, he's played so badly recently. What are you talking about? His game translates really well toward a big game in this game, I think.
No, that's what I was going to say is if you have Harris and McCullough both there to break it, he's the guy that just that athleticism, getting out and running. Again, I agree 100% with that he could really thrive in this situation if he's playing in that role. Now, if you don't have McCullough and now he's trying to break the pressure off the bounce, or Nick Timberlake's trying to break the pressure off the bounce with DeJuan Harris, maybe you have to like really lean into Marco Jackson in that situation. That's when I think things could become problematic. But if you have McCullough and DeJuan Harris to break it, and then you let Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams, and Furphy just play finish on the other end, I think Kansas is in a good spot.
So I think our take is without McCullough, Samford. With McCullough, without Dickinson,
Kansas.
Question.
Yeah.
I think I would probably still take Kansas as well, but it would be like a little bit more of an open discussion for me.
Yep.
With both of them, like definitely Kansas, and without McCullough, Samford.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if they don't have McCullough, I would be very, very nervous. If they have him, even without Dickinson, I would lean. Yeah, I think the way you explained it's how I would feel.
I think that's how I feel. And then if we get Kansas and Gonzaga, that's one where I think Kansas could be in some problems because I actually don't know how they really sit down and guard Gonzaga right now.
Yeah. The one thing I would like is Kansas to go, because this region has a chance to put Zach Edey versus Hunter Dickinson, which I know we've got, in the Big Ten. And then as we get to the next one, then you could also get him against Ryan Cockbrenner or Infaldante. So like, I think this region has some bigs that could be interesting to go up against Zach Edey, depending on how it plays out.
It's just nice that for Purdue that none of that really exists in the first couple of rounds here. Yeah.
Yep.
Like,
I also want to say with Purdue, Kansas's matchup with Samford, they're getting these days to prepare, right? Like this would make me a little more nervous.
That's the other thing.
If Samford wins and then you only have 1 day to prepare, which again, like I think Ryan Nebhard probably handles it fine. And like you said, then you have a secondary guy in Hickman. I just think that Samford press is more nervous on a 1 day turnaround as opposed to these. I don't even know what day this game is, but whether, it's 3 days or what would it be? 3 days or 4 days. So it's a Thursday game. So 3 days Kansas has to prepare.
Yeah. I feel like it's going to be hard for Samford. Like Bill's going to have this thing. Like that's the other thing. Like if you give Bill like multiple days to prepare, Bill Self.
Yeah.
I mean, his record in the tournament it's tough to deal with in those circumstances. He's really, really good. Okay. Bottom end of this last region here, South Carolina and Oregon, Creighton and Akron. You brought up Oregon and N'Faly Dante. Man, has he been really, really, really good recently. Had 25 and 9 against Colorado in the Pac-12 title game. had 14 and 10 with 4 blocks against Arizona in a matchup with Umar Ballo, had 22, 6 and 4 assists in the first game of the Pac-12 tournament they played against UCLA. And then against Brandon Carlson, he had 19 and 12 with 4 steals in a win against Utah. By the way, all of these wins by single digits, all very tight games. They actually just recently lost to Colorado by 4, but another game where N'Faly Dante had 20, 12, 4 assists, 5 blocks. N'Faly Dante has been fantastic recently. And South Carolina has some bodies to throw at him, right? Like they have BJ Mack, they have Josh Gray. You don't really want to throw Colin Murray Boyles at him just because he's 5 inches shorter, but he's long, he's physical. He can be a great help defender against Dante. I think that where I'm at on this is I do think South Carolina is rightfully favored in this game, and I think it's a really, really intriguing game. It all does kind of come down to whether or not Oregon makes shots from distance to me. Like if Oregon can get loose against the South Carolina perimeter defenders, I think it would really help them be able to manage some things. And then on the interior for Oregon, can they consistently guard when Dante is off the court? That's the big one. Because Dante, he's played a ton of minutes recently, and he always plays 30 to 35 a night. If South Carolina can get him in foul trouble, which is something that this South Carolina team does really, really well. South Carolina is going to try and get to the foul line. That is something that they really, really, with Colin Murray Boyles being able to get there pretty consistently now. And BJ Mack draws fouls and Michi Johnson can drive and draw fouls, right? If they can get into Dante's body and kind of get him off the court in foul trouble, that's, I think, the piece of it that I'm watching the most.
Yeah, this is a really interesting matchup. You have draft prospect stuff, and maybe not even this year. Maybe none of these guys are this year, but you have the Colin Murray Boyles for South Carolina, and then you have Kwame Evans Jr. for Oregon.
I know, man. Yeah.
Neither of these guys may end up being 2024 guys, but they're both guys I'm super, super intrigued by. I think Murray Boyle's a little bit more, not a little bit, definitely more, but I'm definitely intrigued by Kwame Evans. Jackson Shelstead has been awesome this year for Oregon in the backcourt. So I think it'll be a fun game. It'll be an interesting matchup. You just, all the stuff you talked about, but even from a draft perspective, I'm fascinated. I think that Murray Boyles, Kwame Evans Jr., assuming they guard each other, I think that's one of the more intriguing first round, just NBA draft matchups. I think that's one of the one that popped off the most as the teams were announced.
It's one that definitely I'm intrigued by. The best NBA prospect matchup, I think, in the first round is probably Kwame Evans against Colin Murray Boyles.
Yeah.
I think both of those guys probably play in the NBA at some point. Both are outstanding defensive players more than anything else. Both of them really need to improve as shooters.
Yeah.
I'm truly intrigued to see those two face off against one another in this first round matchup. It's a toss up either way to me. It really is. How well, Jackson Shelstead, who is a guy that I just intuitively trust, even though he's a freshman, how well his game stands up. And by the way, in the Pac-12 tournament, it went gangbusters. He was fantastic in those 3 games. How well his game stands up against the older backcourt with Michi Johnson of South Carolina, I think is going to be the key here for them. If he plays well, I think Oregon has a real shot to win.
Yeah, no, this will be a fun one. I'm excited for this one.
Then we've got Creighton Akron. I think Creighton in Tennessee, as we kind of move to that next little portion here, they're the 2 teams that I think can really make deep runs in this part of the region. Creighton made a run to the Elite 8 last season. They're top 25 in both offense and defense. They are fantastic on that defensive side of the court, with Ryan Kalkbrenner being able to control the interior. They have great guards in Trey Alexander and Stephen Ashworth, who are older. They have Baylor Shireman, who can handle the ball and knock down shots as well. They have Farabello, who's a senior, who can come off the bench and hit shots. They have Mason Miller, who starts at the 4 for them and has hit 46% from 3 this season. They just really space you out and make life tough. And then they defend in the half court on the other end of the court. I just feel like this is a really, really, really tough team to me. I love Creighton's balance more than anything.
Yeah, I think they're a really good team. People have been saying it for a while that they're like a sneaky, like real chance to Elite Eight, Final Four. I think as I look at this more and more and start to like kind of materialize my picks, I could see me ending up filling out my bracket and taking this team to the Final Four. I like Trey Alexander. I think he could have a tournament where, you know, clutch buckets, clutch moments, those type of things. Baylor Shireman is another guy. Like if it's not Trey Alexander, it might be Baylor Shireman, who's just making big time buckets, an older player, real physical. And then, like you said, like I don't love Cockbrenner maybe as much as some others in terms of like an NBA draft prospect. Like I think I have a few more concerns, but as a college basketball big, in terms of his rim protection, his rim running, those type of things, he's really, really good. And again, when you look at matchups as they move forward throughout this thing, it's a guy that if you end up playing Purdue in the Elite Eight, if you end up playing Kansas in the Elite Eight, you know, he can match up with those big guys that those teams would have. And on top of, you know, playing against Tennessee. So this is a team I'm really intrigued by playing well in the tournament, but also very much from an NBA draft perspective with those guys also.
With Akron, you've got 2 like front court players in Ali and Enrique Freeman, who played on the team that gave UCLA that great game in the 2022 NCAA tournament. That was like a battle down to the end of it. I'm really intrigued to see how their experience plays up here. This Akron team, you know, with Greg Tribble, with Mikhail Dawson, like these guys have been there before. They have played a tough game against a tournament team that they were not supposed to win in UCLA. And they went and they gave them one hell of a matchup where it seemed like they were going to win that game coming down the stretch, and they ended up not winning it. And it was a grinded out battle. It was tough. That Akron team, by the way, do you know who like rarely played on that Akron team that played UCLA? Aziz Bandiago.
Oh,
like 12 minutes in that UCLA game. He was a freshman at that point.
Okay.
But the fact that this team has real tournament experience with their core together, Ali went to Butler last year, transferred back to Akron this year. The fact they have real experience with their core together, I do wonder if they can cause some problems for Creighton, at least. Akron, you know, has been a good team this entire season. I think the MAC gets perpetually underrated in terms of how strong that league is year in, year out. I think Creighton is a little bit too good, but I'm intrigued to see if Akron can give them a game just in terms of having a bunch of older dudes that have been there before.
I mean, I'd love to see Creighton get tested, you know, like I said, as much as I believe in, like, I think it would be awesome to see. But yeah, I think I'm going to rock with Creighton. I think pretty far in this one.
All right. Last little 4 teams here. Tennessee against the winner of Virginia, Colorado State, or Texas against the winner of Virginia, Colorado State. Tennessee against St. Peter's. Shout out St. Peter's. We're back, baby. Yep. Here we are.
Yep.
I think that this is setting up for a Texas-Tennessee matchup where we get a Rick Barnes, Rodney Terry Bowl, where Rodney was on Rick's staff for an incredibly long amount of time. By the way, shout out Rick Barnes. There is not a coach in the country who does a better job of getting minority assistants hired. If you look through his track record, it's incredible. Between Kim English and, you know, Rodney Terry, and, you know, you can go back through Rick's track record. He does a fantastic job of preparing these guys to be successful coaches. On the Texas side, I think that this was a team I was expecting to pick against if they had made the tournament and had a better matchup. I just don't think that Virginia or Colorado State is a team that like I'm wildly concerned about. Colorado State, I think, is a team that can beat Texas. I don't really think Virginia can beat Texas, to be honest with you. I just am so unimpressed. I'm so disappointed that Virginia is in this tournament, guys. Like, it's a tough hang. This Virginia team's a tough hang.
Here's all I want. I just want Virginia, Tennessee to watch Ryan Dunn against Dalton Connect. Like, that was my only thought whenever this came out
It's a good call.
was getting to see what Ryan Dunn / what could Dalton Connect, what could Ryan Dunn do with Dalton Connect / what could Dalton Connect do with that defense. So, when I saw that, that was my first thought, which in fairness to Colorado State, they have, a couple guys that are interesting in Isaiah Stevens and Nick Clifford as well. Texas, Max Amos, shout out him and all the ways he gets his buckets. But just selfishly, that was my first thought when I saw this little group of 4.
So it's funny that you say that. My thought was we get to see potentially Ryan Dunn against Nick Clifford, actually. And we get to learn more about, is Nick Clifford like a guy that we need to be serious about here as a prospect?
That's a great point. Yeah.
Because Nick Clifford is a guy that when I've talked to scouts for Colorado State, like a 6'6", wing, basically a 3-man who doesn't dribble super well, but can knock down shots from the perimeter, rebounds super well, defends at a really high level, but has made 38% of his 100 3-pointers this year after being, something like a 33% 3-point shooter in his years at Colorado. I would like to see what he looks like against real athleticism and against like Ryan Dunn level talent, basically. And, I say this to say like Colorado's played real teams this year. I thought Nick Clifford was particularly really good in that Nevada game. I also think that like there have been a few games this year where I've watched them where I've come away a little bit less impressed with Clifford. Like they kicked the shit out of Creighton earlier this year. And like, he didn't pop for me for a second when I was watching that game. Then like against Colorado, I was like, oh, well, there's this guy, he's like an interesting wing, playing against his old team. He had 15. They beat Colorado, right? Like there was some of that like here and there. And then they played San Diego State earlier this year and he was really good in that game. And I think that's where scouts kind of got clued into him a little bit. I would like to see him perform really well against a good team here or a good defense, at least in Virginia. I don't think I can call them a good team, but I can call them a good defense.
No, that's a great call. Yeah. I didn't even think about Nick Clifford and being able to kind of establish his stock and potentially his place in this draft, that's a good call.
The more I think about this game, Bryce, the more I'm selling myself on it from a draft perspective, because we get Reese Beekman against Isaiah Stevens too.
Yes. Yeah. No, and then the next one, if Virginia gets a win, you get Reese Beekman versus Max Amos. So like you get to see what Reese can do defensively against that. So this little pocket is got a little more NBA draft stuff than maybe what it looked like initially, where, even this first 4, we get one right away. That's a great call with that first matchup.
I would not be surprised if there are scouts that like go to Dayton for that game to see that.
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about it. The next one is this Texas team. I mean, A. Smith, Dylan Disu is a guy that like when I talk to a couple of scouts here and there, they'll bring him up. Dylan Mitchell occasionally will get brought up. He just, hasn't grown as a shooter in the way that people had hoped he would. Look, they, consistently just kind of do stuff. This Texas team, like they don't have like an identity. I feel like when I watch them, like you expect it to be defense, but they're not a great defensive team. You expect them to like be able to handle the ball with their 2 guards and A. Smith and Tyrese Hunter, right? But both those guys like kind of turn the ball over a decent amount, right? Like Dylan Mitchell turns the ball over a decent amount. They don't really shoot the ball like super well because they don't take a ton of threes. I just I've not enjoyed watching this Texas team this year, I guess is where I'm at.
Yeah, I haven't watched a ton, but I'm kind of the same way. Like I've watched, Dylan Mitchell was a guy I was interested coming out of high school. Obviously, didn't, his freshman year didn't go. A lot of things haven't progressed. There's some things I like about his game, but A. Smith is the guy that ends up catching my eye whenever I watch them. So I kind of fall into the same category. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, whether it's Colorado State or Virginia, if whichever one comes out of that, I could see them giving this Texas team a real game. Like, even if we aren't super high on the Virginia team, like the way they play, who knows how a team is going to respond to that. And they're going to guard. And if they find a way to make some shots, if Ryan Dunn takes over defensively, if Beekman has a good night, it could be interesting. And then same thing with Colorado State. You talked about Nate Clifford, and then Isaiah Stevens is a guy that can really score the ball as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting there in that, the first 4 games, and then even the matchup against Texas.
And then this Tennessee team, we'll talk about them maybe even at the expense of the St. Peter's team, because St. Peter's this year, they do defend again. They really get into your ball handlers, but I think that Tennessee with Zakai Ziegler, with Santiago Vescovi, with Meshack, like they have the ball handlers to be able to manage some things if necessary. I love this Tennessee team, and spoiler alert, they're my Final Four pick from this group.
Love it.
I'm aware that I'm going to get yelled at for picking a Rick Barnes coach team to the Final Four. They're loaded. They have old guards. They have old wings in Connect in Josiah Jordan James. They have an incredible big that, another pick for, I mentioned Donovan Dent, I think is the most underrated player in the country earlier. Jonas Adu might be like in the top 5 of that. He is a fantastic defensive player, occasionally can step away and take a 3, makes shots around the interior, just does a really, really great job for what they ask him to do. If they need a defensive guy in the backcourt that has a little bit more size, they'll go Meshack. If they need another bigger body at the 4 or 5, they can go Awaka with Adu. Like, if you want to even go like crazy and you want to throw in like JP Estrella, like they did occasionally here and there against like Alabama and Auburn for like small stretches, I think they feel like okay with him at times. If Spacers and Gainey, who I know is shooting 28%, but like he is a real spacer that teams feel like they have to get out and guard. Dalton Connect, obviously can knock down shots at a high level. Vescovi is a monster shooter. They're just a complete team. Like, I get the Rick Barnes factor, but they're a totally complete team to me. And they can match up to you in any way that you need to match up against them.
No, it's a very interesting team, a very talented team and talented roster. And so I completely understand that. It was hard as I was talking about how much I really like this Creighton team and potentially taking them all the way to the Final Four. Is like, I looked at it as like, man, that means I'm going to have to pick them over Tennessee, which I don't love or feel good about. Because I think that would be an absolute blast of a game, watching those two teams go at it with the backcourts. We've talked about with both teams, with the wings we've talked about with both teams. I think that would be an amazing matchup to watch in what would start off Sweet 16, right? Yeah. So that would be a really fun Sweet 16 game. But yeah, I mean, Tennessee, super talented. I think this is a chance for Dalton Connect. All of a sudden I see him, draft boards a lot more in the lottery, even, around top 10. And it's like, hey, if he goes and has an NCAA tournament run where he scores the ball like he did during a stretch in SEC play, I mean, that really could solidify some things for him as well.
Agree. In this region, I have Tennessee coming out in terms of upset watch. I mean, I guess I would say McNeese definitely deserves some flowers here, even if I don't love the matchup as much as some do for Gonzaga, or against Gonzaga. Samford for sure, depending on Kansas's injury stuff. That's kind of where we're at. But I think we're both on Kansas and Gonzaga if Kansas is healthy. Oregon, I think, is a real chance to beat South Carolina. I don't know that I would call Akron fully live, but that's an old team that has tournament experience at least. against, another team that's older and has tournament experience in Creighton, unfortunately. I do think Creighton's the clear pick there. And then I guess either Virginia or Colorado State. Like this could be like a bit of a wilder region the more we look at it. I think we're just not quite as excited. You know what I mean? About everybody is picking these upsets, but we're not quite there yet on it.
Assuming health for teams, I'm going to leave the top ones alone. And man, as much as I love Colin Murray-Boyles and that team, Oregon is an interesting one there. I think I would go with the number 10. And I just, whether it's Virginia or Colorado State, that just kind of has a vibe. Like nobody likes Virginia. Nobody thinks they should be here. That's no slight on Virginia. I realize people have realistic, real reasons behind that. I just wonder if whoever comes out of that one goes in and upsets Texas in that matchup. So that might actually be the one that I would go with.
Yep. No, I think that's a good call. And look, I think Purdue, everybody's going to be excited to pick against Purdue here. I think that they at least go to the Sweet 16. If it's Gonzaga, I think Gonzaga's ball screen continuity offense can kind of cause them a few issues. If it's Kansas, I think they can beat Kansas. And then if it's any of the other teams, I think that they do beat that team.
Yeah.
And then in the bottom, honestly, Creighton, Tennessee is the Sweet 16 matchup. Maybe that I would be most interested in outside of Auburn, Connecticut. I would love to see those two.
Yeah, no, I think that would be the other one. We talked about, the Kentucky one up here as well. So I was trying, Kentucky versus either Florida, or I guess we've seen that Kentucky against Marquette would be the fun one there in the Sweet 16. But yeah, no, I think Creighton, Tennessee would be awesome.
Okay. I'm picking, look, I mean, I know that this is not, we've talked about Connecticut all year. It's hard for me to pick against Connecticut. I will say, I think that, as we talked about at the top, nobody did them any favors at all, right?
Yep.
This committee did not do them favors, but I think Connecticut is clearly the best team. If you made me pick a different team than Connecticut, I really might take Tennessee, man.
Okay.
And look, I say this to somebody, I had Connecticut in the Final Four of every bracket last year and had them winning 2 of them. So I went the upset choice last year and it worked. Tennessee this year, I think would be kind of an unlikely pick because nobody likes Rick Barnes as a coach, unfortunately. I think I will go Tennessee as my second pick, and I think it's Connecticut, Tennessee in the final.
Okay. I have Connecticut and I haven't got there on the other side yet. I was thinking Connecticut. I was going to take Arizona out of the West. I was actually Kentucky is the team that continues to stand out to me in the South, and Creighton in the Midwest, which means I would have either Kentucky or Creighton coming from that side. So that's where
Kentucky
I'm at.
is another real contender to me.
Yeah.
They are the most talented team outside of maybe Connecticut in the tournament. They can do real damage. It's just whether or not I trust Kentucky to win 6 in a row.
Yeah.
I don't know that I trust this Kentucky team to win 6 in a row now.
No, that's fair.
Okay, Bryce. Do you want to get a quick take about Anatomy of a Fallout before we go?
Yeah, it was. You told me it didn't have any twists. It didn't have whatever.
Not a particularly twisty movie.
Whatever is 1/10 of a twist, it didn't even have that. I don't know what that word is. The movie ended, and me and my wife literally looked at each other It's over?
Yeah.
Like, that's it? There's no, like, nothing? Like, a little bit of something? Anything? No? That's it?
The point of the movie isn't to find out.
Yeah. You listen, you told me it was character driven, not plot driven. It was a lot of reading. Like, you told me everything that it was going to happen going in, like, not happen, but everything it was going, and you were right. It just was a little more to the extreme than I thought.
Yeah, like, to me, did you ever see Marriage Story? So Marriage Story was a Best Picture nominee a few years ago. It's more Marriage Story to me than it is like A Few Good Men or A Time to Kill or something like that. It's more about these two people and their lives together than it is about the idea of finding an answer in terms of the trial, right?
Yeah.
Or what actually happened or something
Yep.
like that. So yeah, no, I liked it a lot, but it's my kind of like movie trying to think through all of that stuff as opposed to like a plot driven, deal.
Well, that's what I told my wife. I said those movies, like A Time to Kill, A Few Good Men, like, what actually happened the whole time. It's just like these very sensitive topics, along with, like, they build out the characters and stuff like that, and so which, I mean, this was a very sensitive topic as well. So maybe I went in with the wrong, even with the heads up. I don't know that I still went in with the right mindset of, like, kind of what it was going to be, and maybe I wasn't kind of invested in the right things as the movie went on. So,
the other question I had for you is, do you have strong takes on the French legal system now?
Oh, is that all, like, real? Like, is that how it?
I don't know, but it's crazy.
That was one of the first things she said to me. Also, it's like, is this how they actually do things? And I'm like, I don't know, but this is crazy compared to, like, I've never been in a courtroom in America, like for an actual trial or anything. So all I know is what you see in the movies and hear about. But, like, I feel like I have a pretty decent idea of what reality is. This is completely different stuff, man. I was like, what is going on? Yeah, that was,
I know,
that was crazy.
Totally insane.
Yeah.
Totally insane. All right, Bryce, tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people what's going on.
Yeah, so at Motor City Hoops on Twitter for Pistons, NBA draft content. Dropping some scouting reports every once in a while over on Substack, the Pistons Pulse, if you want Pistons conversation and topics. Otherwise, here at Game Theory with Sam Vecenie.
Okay, so probably on Wednesday we will be back, and we will talk probably more NBA stuff that day because it'll be the first day before the tournament. It's possible I will go live at some point, like during the tournament, if there's something like fun to break down or if something cool happens. We'll see. Bryce may or may not join me for that. I don't know. But we'll probably be back on Wednesday. If you made me bet, hit the subscribe button while you're here, by the way. It helps. It really, really helps support the show. Go to The Athletic. Keep me employed over there. View articles, subscribe, do everything there. We will be back on Wednesday to talk NBA, not college basketball. This has been super fun and super long. So until next time, we'll talk soon.